Yes. Namaste. I, Samruddhi Mahajan, welcome you all to Bharata First and to this to the session on impact of new findings on Indian history as a part of one of the sessions in our Indian history course at Knowledge Centre. And to talk on this topic, we have Dr. Raj Vedam sir, who would not need any introduction owing to his reach and work on scientific validation of narratives on Indian history. He has been working on it since a very long time now. He's working at the confluence of applied sciences, and using the tools of archaeology, he has done tremendous work in mapping the ancient history of India. He is also co-founder of think tank Indian History Awareness, a scientist and an independent researcher. Sir, it's an honor and pleasure to have you once again on Bharata First platform, this time on Knowledge Centre. Namaste, sir. I welcome you.
Namaste, and thank you for inviting me, Samruddhi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, sir. So without any further ado, so I would like to ask you to begin with your talk.
Okay, let me share my screen, and may request everybody to put themselves on mute. There seems to be some echo.
Just a moment, just a moment. Yeah, yes, sir.
I'm getting a feedback. I think the YouTube feedback, so please mute that.
Is it still troubling? Okay.
All right, I think I had a feedback on my side. I've muted it out. Can you hear me, Samruddhi? And you're able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Outstanding. So let's get started. So welcome you all to this session on impact of new findings on Indian history. I understand that several of you are writing for competitive exams. So what I present over here is contrary to what your examiners will want to see on your exam sheets. So I give you that warning that you should use your diligence and understanding of the forces at work over here before you take any of this material out. What I'm going to present to you is evidence-based Indian history. This is contrary to what you're required to write in your UPSC exams and other such things, because those are controlled by certain forces. And we'll investigate some of those things over here. So the first exhibit I'd like to show to you is the following. So we saw some time back, there was a RTI that in 2020 given to NCERT, asking them that you made certain assertions in class 12, and can you provide the source where you conclude certain statements? They make certain statements, and also the number of temples repaired by certain despots. And the answer from NCERT was that information is not available on the files of the department. This I'd like to present to you as a gross neglect of duty at best, and at worst, a criminal cover-up of opinionated history that is pushed on the nation. So this is what we're seeing in things of this nature. We see an enforced narrative based on bigoted ideologies. That is what, unfortunately, Indians are subject to in India and outside. So to back up these assertions, I'd like to point you to historiography. Historiography is the process of writing history. And what we are seeing is that in India, we have had several agencies control our history, writing of Indian history. Indians for a long time have been happy with the notion of itihasas, Puranas, Thala Puranas, and the accounts of family genealogies, kings, epigraphy. Go to a temple, you see epigraphy. So this has been our notion of history for a very, very long time. However, when the colonial people came to India, they wanted to write a history of India for the civil servants. So they started this whole process of historiography. And they were followed soon by the Eurocentric forces who wanted to understand why is it that Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek are related. And wherever the colonial people went, the missionaries were not far behind. And so they came and they had their own axe to grind in this whole thing. And since 1947, we have been taken over by a socialist academia, which has a certain lens it brings to the picture. We'll talk about that. And since 1972, at least, we've had a Marxist narrative also coming in. So what we're seeing in Indian history is our history has been hijacked and ideology of these agencies have been added, and that has led to a subversion of identity. So whenever we see a narration in Indian history, one has got to ask the question, what lens has been used to write this? What is the evidence used to write this? So those are the kind of questions a logical, rational person would ask, unless one is deeply wedded to a certain ideology over here. So what does this tell us? This tells us that there's something called an Aryan invasion on the deep history of India. Now, you might not have encountered the term deep history. What is deep history? A deep history is something, for example, people say history began when writing was there, because writing is a process of recording your history. And so everything prior to writing is prehistory, or even deep history is called proto-history. I think that does a great disservice to the Indian civilization, because we have had a very reliable oral record for thousands of years. And this is not the Western experience where they don't have an oral tradition, but the Indians have had an oral tradition. So we can't do a disservice to our own history by discounting this oral tradition. So I prefer to call history as deep history of India, where we can make use of multidisciplinary evidence to talk about very, very ancient periods. So anyway, in the deep history of India, we're seeing the notion says bands of male warriors from Central Asia invaded or migrated to India 1500 BC, replacing the existing civilization, bringing in Vedic religion, Sanskrit language, Vedic ecosystems, and so on. And so the methods they've used to make these assertions are that of linguistics. And we'll take a look at this in a little while. This has led to great structural problems in Indian history. There is something that I call an enforced narrative, which you're required to regurgitate in your UPSC exams. In contrast to that, we have something called an evidence-based narration. At this point in my lecture, I put question marks over here because we have not proved these things. At the end of the lecture, we'll see, can we remove the question marks? The enforced narrative tells us that there is an Aryan invasion theory, but the evidence says it's out of India. The enforced narrative says Indian thought only impacted all nations to the east of India, which is Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, all these countries. But we can show Indic thought impacted the east and the west. They say the Indian civilization is recent. We can show the Indian civilization is ancient. They say Indians borrowed from the Greeks and Babylonians, but we can show the Indic thought seeded the Greeks and Babylonians. They say Vedic culture is responsible for widespread poverty, but we can show that invasions are responsible for widespread poverty. Now, I'm not going to cover all of these things because that's about a 20-hour workshop in order to cover everything. So I'm going to be very brief in some of the things I'm doing. I'll highlight perhaps a couple of these things over here. The question is, as logical, rational, analytic people who are used to evidence, we have to ask, how do we evaluate these claims? Here, you have two sets of claims over here. You need to examine the methodology. You have to see what is the data used to advance some of these claims. What is the provenance of the data? What are the models used? What are the methods used? What are the claims made? Do the claims follow from the methodology that you have presented? So these are some of the questions that we should ask. And we need an evidence-based, rational, logical analysis of the data, models, methods, frameworks, and claims. And what we see is that there's a whole lot of data for history from archaeology, genetics, epigraphy, paleontology, astronomy, climate, old records, science scripts. Wherever you look in India, you're going to find data for the history of India. And you can marshal this data into several models like linguistics model, archaeology model, genetics, astronomy. Many models can be proposed to talk about the history of India using the data that we have. So I say that a good model should explain the context multidimensionally. There are many dimensions to our existence and our history, and a good model should be able to explain these things multidimensionally, and should also be used to make predictions. If there is some period of history we don't know about, a good model should be able to predict and say, probably that is what it was, and fill the gaps. So if we find some observations that do not fit a model, then a red flag must go up. That red flag is your skepticism that asks, what is wrong? Why is that this observation does not fit the linguistics model, for example? Then you have to ask, is the data wrong? Are the methods wrong? Are the conclusions wrong? What is wrong over here? So that's a kind of skepticism that we need to advance our understanding of Indian history. So I made some assertions over there about 5 agencies, and now I need to give you the proof for that. So I said initially there's a colonial and missionary framework that brought in racial bigotry and religious bigotry and hatred, resulting in a certain narration of Indian history by the colonial people, which became the received wisdom for later generations. So where is the evidence for this? Well, the ideological scholarship starts with people like William Jones and Max Muller. In their works, what we see is that they were motivated by a desire to uphold biblical history. And what this history is, I'll show it to you presently. And initially, India had a king list, for example, a chronology that was there in the Puranas that had perfect synchronism and matching with the Nepal king list, Kashmir king list, the Purana king list. Everything was in perfect synchrony. However, the problem for the colonialists was that they saw the Indian chronology goes far beyond the creation date which they had in mind. And they said, how is this possible? How can the Indians have a king list that goes beyond the Masonic flood, beyond the 4004 BC creation date? So they took it on themselves to correct the Indian chronology. So they went about saying these kings are mythical. They removed them from the list. They said these kings belong here. They moved the king list around. After they were done with Indian chronology, the synchrony that we had internally was totally lost. Even today, it is irreconcilable with the traditional account because of the shenanigans of these people and the things that they did. In their works, we find that India is presented as a primitive, backward, stagnant society, and the British presented as modern, progressive, and advanced. And what do we mean by upholding the biblical chronology? Well, even today, there are fundamentalists who believe in the Genesis account of creation, where they believe that God created the world in 4004 BCE based on the prophet genealogies in the Old Testament. By adding them up, they proposed that God had created the world in 4004 BCE, and way down over here, Noah's flood happened in 2348 BCE. When this flood event happened, the belief that they had was that God destroyed the world, and the only people who survived were Noah, his descendants, and the animals who took on the ark. So this is their thinking. So anything they saw in history, they wanted to relate it back to the Noah tradition. And in India, clearly, they failed at it, and they tried a lot to do this. And where is the evidence for the fact that they believed in these things? We are seeing in their writings, William Jones, he says, either the first 11 chapters of Genesis are true, or the whole fabric of our national religion is false. He writes this in Asiatic Research, 1788. Another place, I'm obliged to believe the books of Genesis. Max Muller, he says, I look upon the creation given in Genesis as simply historical. So what we are seeing is that these people came with a biblical lens. They saw Indian chronology that is very, very ancient, and they worked hard to present it as wrong, incorrect, and they imposed a young chronology in India. And Max Muller, in a letter to his wife, has collected his works over here. He says that the translation of the Veda will, to a great extent, decide the fate of India, the growth of millions of souls in that country. It is the root of the religion. To show them what that root is the only way of uprooting all that has sprung from it for the last 3,000 years. So here we are. If we think these are honest brokers, clearly their writing shows they were not honest in their ideologies at all. They came with a certain lens and they wanted to impose Indian chronology and history in accordance with the worldview which they espoused at that time. That is what we're seeing here. They were followed by anthropologists like Herbert Risley, for example, who used discredited race science, craniometrics, nose measurement, width and height to classify races in India. And he saw this many races in India, prevailing races. And he was also the census commissioner. So he entrenched the notion of Aryans as a race. There's no such word as Aryans, but then he entrenched that notion as a race. And he entrenched the notion of caste in 1901, and Indians are forced to declare what they call as caste, and the fluid Jati Varna system was transformed into one of caste over here, which is an alien word in India coming from the Portuguese casta. Unfortunately, this kind of work that they did has meant a great perversion of the Indian identity. Well, what about the Eurocentric people? We see Eurocentrism, linguistics, and a toxic outsider lens academia in the mix over here. So ever since William Jones found the commonality of Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek, Europeans have been on a quest to understand what is their identity? How are they related to the Indians? Why do they have a language that is common over here? So initially they thought that India is the homeland of the people who spoke an ancestral language. They thought that all languages are related because there is an ancestral language called Proto-Indo-European language, and they thought that the homeland of this was in India. Then they discovered in northern Iraq, southern Turkey, the Mitannis, Hittites, and late 1800s, and they found that these people had Vedic gods. They had Sanskrit, and they asked, how is it that Vedic culture is so far away from India? And their proposal was that, okay, maybe these were not in India, but in Central Asia, and so on. So these kind of debates took place, homeland shifted, and it finally landed up in Central Asia. And Aryans had to be in India in 1500 BC, according to this linguistics model. Then they discovered the Indus Valley civilization in the late 1800s. So in 1900s, by looking at the ruins in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, it became an invasion. Aryans had invaded from Central Asia, and the methodology they used was linguistics and archaeology. Now that invasion has been discredited, it has become a migration theory in 2000s, Aryan migration theory from Proto-Indo-European homeland, and the methods that are used are linguistics, archaeology, and genetics. So in your mind, you might wonder, what exactly is this linguistics methodology? I'm giving you a sample over here. So one of the methods is comparative linguistics. If you suspect a relationship between a bunch of languages, you identify something called cognates. Cognates are words with same meaning in different languages. If you have about 10 or 20 languages, you take a Swadesh list, 100 words or whatever, and of commonly used words or technologies, and you compare the phonology, syntax, morphology of the words. In other words, how is that sound formed? Is that sound formed at the back of the throat? Is it formed by hitting the tongue to the roof? Is it formed by closing your lips together? Or is it formed by hitting the tongue against the teeth? So this is the structure of sound. So by studying the structure of sound and how it changes, they attempt to reconstruct a proto-language. The problem is it is subjective, informal, and it lacks testability. The methodology was they propose a rule saying this is how this word changed from this sound to this sound. For example, in Maharashtra, we got the va sound, which in Bengal becomes a ba sound. So va has become ba, like Vrindavan becomes Brindavan by the time we go to Bengal. So these kind of changes are what they were trying to study over there. And they proposed very, very subjective ways of doing these things. And that's a problem with it. But several other methods are there, have been proposed, lexicostatistics, glottochronology. Essentially, you've got sound laws. Sound laws means A is an older form of sound than B. And the question comes, how do you know it is older? Well, it's sometimes pulled out of a hat. Sometimes they'll call evidence of a very old form of sound, maybe in Sanskrit or so on. And Grimm's law, I'll give you an example. The sound ba is older than ba, older than pa, older than fa. So these are the kind of relationships they attempted to find by pulling it out of a hat, literally in many cases. And on the basis of that, they construct the linguistic methodology in which they reconstructed a hypothetical language called Proto-Indo-European, supposedly the ancestor of all the Indo-European languages that was constructed academically. There is no evidence that anybody spoke this language, no epigraphy, no records, no such thing. So anyway, this language is used, and they propose that the daughter languages are Balto-Slavic, Germanic, Celtic, Italic, Hellenic, Indo-Iranian. You see Sanskrit over here. It's a comparative method. It's an idealization. That's all we need to know. I'll give an example of how the Proto-Indo-European word for wheel, this famous bullock cart is seen in every village in India. Even today, this wheel is there. Mohenjo-daro, for example, we see this over here. And so in different languages, Sanskrit, Latin, Greek, Hittite, Tocharian, the word for wheel is chakra in Sanskrit, rotum in Latin, kuklos in Greek. Yoke is yoga, lugam, zur, dugo, nabya, umbilicus, aksa, axis, and so on. And so the proposed reconstruction from PIE is they propose that there was a word called kweklo, which star means it is not a real word. It is a reconstructed word in academia. A reconstructed word called kweklo that gave rise to Proto-Indo-Iranian called kekro, which is also reconstructed. No evidence of this has been found. That gave rise to the Sanskrit word chakra. So what you have to see over here is all the evidence needed to reconstruct the PIE. The data was Sanskrit. Sanskrit provided the data along with modern European languages to reconstruct the so-called PIE. So here is the irony of this whole thing. Making use of Sanskrit as the real evidence that you have, they work backwards with all kinds of assumptions and laws, reconstructed something called PIE. Then they turned the whole thing around and they made PIE into a fact, not a derived entity from the data that you had. They made that into a fact. And from that fact, we got all the other languages. So this is the kind of absurdity that we are seeing in the linguistic analysis. And as far as the homeland is concerned, if you've got a reconstructed language, PIE, you need a homeland. Where were the people who spoke this? That was also subject to a lot of European nationalism ideas, where each was trying to say it was in, for example, they located it in Northwest India over here, or in Southern Russia over here, or in Germany over here. So various compulsions were there to locate the language in various places. Eventually, they settled between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. The Yamnaya people over here, they settled on this area because it is equidistant from Scandinavia, equidistant from India. So because of that, they said probably this is where the PI speakers were. But there's no evidence that such a people lived there or any such thing. So today there are two modern narratives. So there is the Maria Gimbutas, the Kurgan or steppe hypothesis, and Colin Renfrew, the Anatolian or the steppe or the Anatolian hypothesis, sorry. So Maria Gimbutas says that Indo-European expansion happened in three waves, with the domestication of the wild horse in Central Asia, along with invention of iron, chariots, and so on. These people went on a conquering spree between 4000 BC and 1500 BC in three waves. On the other side, and the Anatolian hypothesis, Colin Renfrew says that the Indo-European expansion followed the invention of agriculture. Anatolia is Turkey. So he said that agriculture was invented there, and the spread of agriculture took languages also along, and his date is around 6500 BCE. Today, there are some people who say genetics favors Kurgan and so on, but we'll examine these assertions. So the Kurgan or steppe hypothesis says that between Caspian Sea, Black Sea, you have the Yamnaya people, 3500 BC. At the same period of time, you have civilization in Sumeria, Egypt, India, Edekal, you have in China, and all these places you have civilization going on. It is not the story of civilization. This is the story of who are the European people, really. That's what it is. And from these people, after having domesticated the wild horse, the theory says that by 2500 BC, they're spread to the west, becoming the corded ware, the beaker ware people, and to the east, Andronovo people. And by 1500 BC, they specialized to Hittites, Mycenaeans, Babylonians, Bactria, Margiana, archaeological complex, and they have spread into Sindh, India. This is the beginning of the Aryan invasion theory for us. And by 500 BC, this theory says They have entrenched themselves in the Ganga plain, and you see the appearance of Dravidians in the record over here. So this is the story according to the AIT, Aryan invasion theory. And our job is to see, does this bear out with all the evidence that we have? So we are seeing that this theory has come about by the frameworks that I talked about. Initially, the colonial hegemony. Colonial hegemony was the Portuguese, Dutch, French, and the British who tried to write the historiography of India, along with Christian imperialism from 1500s, people like Caldwell, Geopope, and many, many other missionaries, along with Eurocentrism, people like Herbert Risley, Max Muller, using methods of linguistics, anthropology, caste, and so on, with circular arguments and dependencies that come about with the Aryan invasion theory. And we see they have convergent ideologies in trying to describe the history of India in this particular way. And you might think that we live in more enlightened times and maybe rationality would take root. Unfortunately, that is not true. The newer frameworks reinforce this received wisdom from the past because it continues to serve the interests of several agencies over here. So we see Aryan migration and invasion has been entrenched as received wisdom, and outsider sociology is used. Etic means outsider, somebody who's outside the tradition, is looking at the Indian social dynamics with the lenses that are appropriate for the Western experience, whether it is modernism, postmodernism, colonialism, post-colonialism. Many of these things are relevant for the Western societies. Unfortunately, these lenses have been imported into India and force-fed on all the social dynamics of India, seeing everybody in a certain way. So this is working hand in hand with archaeology, people like Maria Gimbutas, Colin Renfrew, along with genetics today, people like David Reich. But these are not independent studies. These studies are taking circular dependencies. They use constraints from each other and try to validate each other by doing the kind of studies they do. This means they're not independent lines of evidence. They are merely trying to take a certain line and trying to see if their analysis can be fit into that framework. And this fitting is spurious. That's what I try to show in many of my works over here. Then finally, I talked about the socialist and Marxist ideologies, and the evidence of that is in the writings of Marx himself. So Marx argued that history, all of history, is a history of class struggles. Eventually, he thought the working class will triumph over the capital class, win control, forever erasing all classes. So they are fantasies of a utopian, classless society. And the only way to get that utopian classless society, according to Marx, was a bloody revolution. So by killing the old order, destroying it completely, you will have a new world order. That was his way of looking at it in the Communist Manifesto. And the difference between socialism and communism is very nebulous. In communism, we see a violent revolution to have this classless society. Socialism is a little more flexible. It seeks change and reform through democratic process within the existing social political structure. Unfortunately, it is still has the same bigoted worldview saying that the old order is corrupt. We need to destroy the old order to get this classless utopia of the future. So they are joined at the hip based on their ideology. That is what we see in India. And unfortunately, we have this. In 1947, Nehru said we made a tryst with destiny. And the tryst that he saw with destiny was a very unfortunate one. He did not see any connection of the new India with the old India. He broke away from that because of the socialist leaning. He saw the old as backward, primitive, corrupt, and so on. He did not want to connect with the ancient civilization of India. So we see that Nehru was a member of the Fabian Society, which was a society for who tried to create a socialist state in Great Britain at that particular time. So he came to India with these ideas, and we see that in his policies, in the administrative reforms, and everything. Since 1972, his daughter Indira Gandhi, for political survival, she made a pact with the communists who only wanted the HRD sector and education sector. Narul Hassan, the Minister for HRD, Culture, Education, he created, appointed, controlled the entire ecosystem of socialist Marxist education. Today, all these bodies you see is controlled by the Marxists, set up, controlled by the Marxists. And in the process of 50 years or more that they have been in existence, they've completely edged out the emic practitioner. Emic means somebody who's within the tradition. A scholar who's within the tradition does not have a voice at the table today. he's been pushed out entirely in line with the socialist, Marxist ideology. So that has continued. So in 50 years, we have completely eradicated the internal non-socialist, non-Marxist scholarship. If you want to be a vice chancellor today or a professor or the head of the department, you better be a card-carrying communist or a socialist or belonging to the certain ideology. And that's the unfortunate the outcome of this. So what are the impact of these outsider frameworks? The colonial people came to uphold biblical chronology, show Hindus as primitive, backward, stagnant. Eurocentric, same, show Hindus primitive, superiority of white Europeans. Missionaries to uphold biblical chronology, show Hindus as primitive, promote Christianity, and show class conflicts. Class conflicts is very important for the missionaries because by saying there is an upper caste and a lower caste, they could come with their social dynamics saying, you lower caste have been suppressed by this upper caste, and so on. By creating anger in people, their aspirations are converted to anger, and they could alienate them from the civilization to convert them. That is what we see in the missionary activities. Socialist academia again show Hindus as primitive, backward, stagnant, and they have the subaltern studies, history from below, the conflict dynamics, oppressor, oppressed. All of Indian social dynamics is converted into a history of class struggles, that this class is against that class, oppression of this person by that person, and so on and so forth. So it's a bottom-up kind of a narrative where these bottom-up voices are amplified. Unfortunately, there's a lot of noise when you amplify bottom-up, and that is what we're seeing. So the discourse today is completely uncivil because of this kind of analysis happening over here. And we see finally the Marxist belief in showing Hindus as primitive, backward, stagnant, again subaltern, history from below, show class conflicts. And we see curiously in the southern part of India, there's a section of people in Tamil Nadu who have a deracinated framework. They have internalized all of this nonsense and they have got their own ideology coming out of this deracinated framework. Deracinated means you're removed from the culture of this country. So Dravidians would love to say they have nothing to do with the common culture of India and they're an ancient Tamil civilization and so on. And they go about showing Hindus as primitive, backward, and they work hand in hand with Dravidian Christian movement, promoting Christianity and showing class conflicts, that they are the oppressed people and so on. So this is a very important slide to understand the social dynamics of today in relation to the historiography. Many of you are writing your exams, and so you're going to regurgitate some of this narratives from here. But the reality and the evidence shows our country is messed up because of the narratives come and because of these things. Anyway, what is the impact of the spurious Aryan invasion migration narrative? This is a fake narrative that Aryans came in 1500 BC, and these were nomads from Central Asia. These were illiterate people who did not even have a script. Remember, if you have a script, you have writing, you're civilized. If you don't have script, you're illiterate, and so on. So these illiterate people are running around in India. They destroyed the Harappa civilization superior to them, and they were running around with caste, cows, and curry, and all these kind of things. And India had to wait for 1,000 years when the Greeks made contact with Patliputra and Magadha in 300 BC. And suddenly we got Brahmi script, Ashokan script, and other things. Suddenly came over there, India became civilized after contact with the Greeks. And then they say, look here, you're not had enough time for, or gestation time for knowledge generation, whether it is in mathematics, astronomy, medicine. So if you have any evidence of highly advanced mathematics, astronomy, you must have learned it from other older civilizations, which means the Greeks, Babylonians, Chinese, and so on. So with this fake narrative, what we are seeing is they say that, for example, Aryans brought Sanskrit into India. The Brahmi script is derived from the Aramaic script in Levant or Israel. They say that astronomy came to India from Babylon. They say that the Greeks got us math and sciences. They say that the Turkic Muslims got us culture, cuisine, architecture, music, and civilization. British got us science, technology, rational thought. And Bhakti was taught to us by Saint Thomas, who came to Muzeres-Port, and the Dravidians are Elamites. So we are seeing criminal distortion of the history of the Indian civilization because of these 5 frameworks I talked about. All the anchor points of chronology in India has been destroyed because of their activities to uphold the biblical chronology. Every aspect of Indian knowledge systems and identity has been perverted and discredited and thrown out in favor of this narrative that Indians learn from outside. So this is the impact of all the frameworks that I talked to you about. So until now, I have only told you what the problem is. And from now on, we're going to see where the evidence is taking us rather than this enforced narrative. Until now, everything you've learned is the enforced narrative of India. What is a rebuttal? Like I said, if we had to rebut any of these things, we need evidence-based rational examination. We just can't say, I don't like it and therefore it is false. No, that's not enough. That's an opinion. You need evidence, you need facts, you need to have a rational, logical way of analyzing it to make a claim. So we will see the evidence from texts, from archaeology, from genetics, climatology, geology, astronomy, as long as we have some time. I put this here for shock value. Over here is a collection of Indian intellectuals from the past, ancient people from Abhinavagupta, Adi Shankara, Agathiyar, Andal, and others, all the way to Vyasa, Yajnavalkya, Vishnu Sharma, and so many other people. There are just a few names over here from different parts of India, from different time periods. Who over here is talking about Aryan invasion? Is anybody here saying that we are two people in India? Some of us came from outside and we pushed these other people to the south of India. Or do they say that we are dark people, they are fair people, and we are one race, they are another race? No such nonsense. In any writing in India, any author, any period of time, you're seeing a common culture throughout India. So this is our internal evidence. Now look at the irony. This internal evidence is staring at us in the face, but our minds have not registered it because we have been told that there's an Aryan invasion. The British came and told us 200 years ago that you're Aryans and Dravidians and tribals, and we have internalized that and thrown out all of our internal evidence out of the door. Thousands of years of our ancestors' works have not been regarded. So that is what we're seeing. So bottom line, this whole conflict dynamics, this whole notion of two races or insiders, outsiders is completely absent in the internal evidence going back many thousands of years. Then we take a look at a Britisher called Pargeter, who wrote this work, Indian Historical Tradition. So he was an early, let me just suppress this and hide this video. Okay, so he, at an early period of time, he says he studied all the Puranas and other things, made a deep study. He was a judge. Because he was a judge, he could apply a rational, logical, evidence-based analysis. Very important to understand that. A judge has got to examine the evidence, and he was capable of doing that. He looked at the evidence, he analyzed it, and came out with statements. He said, Indian tradition knows nothing of the Aryan invasion. The Northwest and Punjab were not regarded as ancient home, nor with veneration or special esteem. The special places in India are to the east, Banaras, Varanasi, that is holy. There is no holy spot in Northwest Punjab. Tradition has preserved copious accounts giving an entirely different description of the earliest Ailas, who he called Aryans, and their beginnings in India. He's saying mid-Himalayan regions are sacred land, and so on. So he says this copious tradition, all this copious tradition was falsely fabricated. The truth has been absolutely lost if the current theory is right. What is the current theory? In 1920s, the current theory was Aryan invasion. He's asking the question, is this probable that this entire thousands of years of Indian tradition is falsely fabricated? If this tradition is false, why, how, in whose interest was it all fabricated? Indian tradition suggests a reverse origin for the Aryans. He's saying it is out of India, it is not into India. So at an early period of time, we find that Pargeter had already called out some of the inconsistencies by examining the evidence. Two other people in our time, Shrikant Thalagiri, Nicholas Kazanas. Shrikant Thalagiri wrote these books, analyzed the linguistics argument in great detail. He's got a lot of talks on YouTube. Encourage you to see that or read his books or read his blogs. His position is the whole PIE theory is completely inconsistent if the homeland is in Central Asia. He says, I can reconcile to much of the PIE if the homeland is situated in Northwest India. If it is an out of India, then many of these theories make sense. Otherwise, there are a lot of inconsistencies over there. Nicholas Kazanas is a Greek scholar, And he has an even more stronger opinion over here. He had analyzed the Indo-European deities from various cultures, Scandinavian, Germanic, Celtic, and so on. And in his analysis, he said, all the mainstream academic publications on the subject of reconstructing PIE are worthless because he said if there is a common language, that common language is so old that you don't have any data to reconstruct it. That is this position. So clearly we are seeing there are issues with the linguistic model, and here are two scholars who do that. Then the Harappa archaeology, the people who claimed that there was an invasion, that too has been challenged. For example, P.V. Kane, he says that interpolating a man-made destruction of a huge city of like Mohenjo-daro by finding a few skeletons is wholly unjustified. American scholar Dales, he pointed out that even the skeletons that people presented as evidence of invasion, they belong to different epochs of the city, different time periods. So there's not even one point time period. Dales further says there is no destruction level covering the latest period of city, no sign of extensive burning, no bodies of warriors clad in armor with weapons of war, not a single bit of evidence that can be brought forth as unconditional proof of armed conquest and destruction on the supposed scale of Aryan invasion. Kenneth Kennedy is a bone specialist, so he analyzed the bones of the Mohenjo-daro skeletons and so on. And he said the injuries in the bones of most skeletons had healed well before death. Again, discounting this whole invasion nonsense. And this is from Michel Danino's work in 2016. So they challenged the invasion this way, saying that there's no evidence of invasion anywhere. It was just a hallucination of many of the Eurocentric people and the colonial people, which was gleefully accepted as received wisdom by the Marxists and Socialists in India. Michel Danino, in this paper, he's got some very strong positions. He presents evidence that the people who support Aryan invasion theory have invented non-existent texts. They are quoting texts that don't even exist. They have done deliberate mistranslation of text, invention of non-existent archaeological evidence. Such evidence doesn't even exist, but they are saying that. Distortion of the archaeological evidence, the evidence that is presented is distorted. Basic methodological flaws by using circular reasoning, something they make an assumption becomes a fact suddenly. Recycling some long discarded racial theories. Finally, this is relevant for our times even today, misquoting, blanking, and demonizing scholars opposed to the Aryan paradigm. It continues to the present day. So he makes very strong assertions with evidence. I encourage you to read this paper so you'll have a good idea of the people who propose Aryan invasion theory. Are they standing on firm grounds or completely shaky grounds? Unfortunately, this is what one will have to write in the exams. Several other evidence are there not fitting this Aryan invasion or migration hypothesis. And the biggest one staring at us is Saraswati River. So the Saraswati River is presented in the Rig Veda as a powerful flowing river from the Himalayas to the ocean. And the problem is that the Saraswati River, geologically, we know it dried up by 1900 BCE. The Aryans are supposed to have come to India in 1500 BCE. If they came in 1500 BCE and composed the Rig Veda in India, how could they have talked about a powerful flowing Saraswati River? It was non-existent in that time. So we have a big problem over there. So many of the Aryan invasion people said, oh, the river Saraswati is mythical, or it is some other river in Afghanistan which they encountered on their way to India. All utter nonsense. So we are in a position today where scientists have to publish papers saying, look here, there existed a perennial river in the Harappan heartland. This paper, for example, published in 2019 in Scientific Reports in Nature. So over here, what you see is this today's Indus course, and this dotted line that you see here, this is the Saraswati. And the Sutlej used to feed the Saraswati earlier, but after tectonic plate movements and so on, the Sutlej has joined the Indus around 2000 BC onwards, 4,000 years ago. And that is one of the reasons why the Saraswati has dried up. So this paper, for example, by analyzing the minerals in the soil, they found mica and other such things 3 to 10 meters below the surface on both sides of the modern Ghaggar in a stretch of 300 kilometers up to the Pakistan border over here. And so the presence of this sand is an indication of existence of a powerful river. And this paper says that Saraswati River had two distinct perennial phases, meaning flowing throughout the year. One of those phases was 80,000 to 20,000 years ago. And the second phase, disjoint from that, is 9,000 to 4,500 years ago. This gives us an upper bound on the where the Saraswati verses were composed in the Rig Veda. It cannot have been older than 9,000 years because this is the time frame when this was done. So secondly, we have found many ancient settlements also over here. So this picture, for example, over here, this is from this paper from Deccan College in 2013. So this one shows all these dots over here where there were settlements have been found. The question I'd like to ask you to think, today you can have an artificial city like Bangalore where there is no river besides Bangalore. So they get all their water from the Kaveri River by pumping it with electrical energy from more than 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers away. There's the pump water into Bangalore. But in the old times, you had to situate your town, city, village, settlement along the banks of the river because water was critically important. If the water dries up, guess what? You leave whatever you're constructed and you go wherever water is. So here we are finding in this so-called mythical river, we have a lot of settlements over here. How is that possible? So there must have been a river over there. So this paper is talking about several radiometric datings from this place. And I have highlighted some of those things over here. In Mehrgarh, for example, some of the oldest carbon dating has been 9,385 years before present. It's a very ancient date. So one might wonder, if this is the kind of antiquity for the Indian people, do we have evidence of this in other places? Yes, we do have. We have evidence in astronomy. I'm going to be talking about astronomy shortly, where we see in the Indian records, observations are there of astronomical phenomena that can reliably be dated with science to a certain period in time that goes to these ancient time frames. The second line of evidence is genetics. Genetics also tells us that India was populated in an ancient period of time, so this is not unlikely that, that this is there. Kalibangan, some of the oldest dates that we see is 6,700 years before present or after calibration to 5566 BCE or 7,500 years before present in Kalibangan. And in Rakigadi, we are seeing 6,180 years before present. We are seeing carbon dating over here. And if you go to Bhirana, some of the oldest dates that we are seeing is 8,350 years before present. So clearly, we are seeing some pretty ancient dates by looking at radiocarbon datings as reported in this journal article by Dixit. We have another line of evidence by the records and the expert opinion of archaeologists who have spent their entire lifetime on the archaeology in India. And one such person is Bibilal. Bibilal was working with Mortimer Wheeler. From that time, his career has started, and he continues to have opinions on this even today. And he says that by analyzing the material evidence from Harappa, there is no periodization. Periodization means you're forced to study, for example, that there's a Harappa period, then there's a Vedic period. That implies that there's a disjoint Harappa Vedic period. Whereas what Bibilal is saying is there is no such periodization. It's all mixed. For example, he's showing the Pashupati seal, the very famous Pashupati seal, Mohenjo-daro, 3000 BCE. The swastika, which is a very Hindu motif, this is there in Mohenjo-daro in one of the seals over there. And we are seeing that terracotta figurines are showing evidence of sindoor. Even today, married women wear the sindoor mark, which is a cultural continuity from Harappa times to now. Then the terracotta figurine showing the Namaste pose. Namaste is a deeply Vedantic concept saying Narayana in me is bowing to the Narayana that is inside you. That is an Advaitic concept which is present apparently in Harappa over here. Then we are seeing in Kalibangan what looks like Shivalinga over here. Then you're seeing yoga asana positions. Several terracotta figurines have been gotten here. Yoga is a deeply central aspect of Hinduism. So Bibilal's position is that there is no disjoint Harappa and Vedic periods. Rather, there's a cultural continuity that goes through this entire archaeological record. And recently a paper came out in 2021 where these researchers, they recovered from Indus archaeological site, Rajasthan, 7 multi-nutritional food balls. And formed of legumes, cereals, mung, and so on. It appeared to be some ritual offering because there were some other bull figurines and other such things that said it was a ritual thing. So I called this out saying that this has got great correspondence to today's Pindadana. Pindadana is today, even today, Hindus offer to their ancestors on a certain day, they offer rice balls and others as offerings. And this appears to have a cultural continuity going back to Harappa times. Very, very interesting. And we are also seeing that iron was declared to have been brought into India by the invading Aryans. The invading Aryans had weapons made of iron and chariots and so on. And these are superior to the Bronze Age weapons that the Harappans had because that is a softer metal. And therefore, they subjugated India. That is the theory that was advanced by Tiwari, Banerjee in this time frame that Aryans brought Iron Age to India. This report is saying that in the campus of University of Hyderabad in Gachibowli, they found artifacts, iron artifacts, knives, blades. Professor K.P. Rao tested it in a lab over there with simulated luminescence, and the date is ranged from 1800 to 2400 BCE, meaning that long before the Aryan invasion, there is already iron in India. And if you look at this, Iron Age in India, this is from the Japanese professor, paper Iron Age in South Asia in 2018. He's showing that in Brahmagiri, in Karnataka, for example, Kudremukh, we know, is a place where a lot of iron, Bhadravati, and places like that. So we are seeing iron, very ancient time frames over here. And we are seeing over here in Gachibowli, like I said, in 2200 BCE. All of these are archaeological sites. We are seeing evidence that iron technology is going from southern India to northern India. Over here, we are seeing earlier and earlier dates. Iron has not come from northwest India into India, rather from southern India, it is moving northwards. So clearly, this further erodes the claim that Aryans brought iron into India. By looking at the material evidence collected in this particular reference, we see that that cannot be admitted. Then we are seeing chariots in Saraswati Sindhu civilization. For the last 3 to 4 years, ever since Sanauli, they found grave burials with entire chariots in them. That has shocked the nation because it is telling us that more than in 2200 BCE or 1800 BCE, we are seeing evidence of chariots in India much before the Aryans are supposedly brought chariots and horse to India. So the claim there was that Indians did not know what the horse or the chariot, and the Aryans are the ones that brought them. Well, that is invalidated by these findings, material findings over here in the Sindhu-Saraswati civilization. We are also aware that there are migrations out of India in various time periods, and these migrations have been triggered by natural disasters. We know in climatology, 8,200 years ago, there was a 300-year dry event. 5,900 years ago, there was intense drought. 4,200 years ago, there was a 200-year collapse of the monsoon that led to several issues over here. So we see that India has been subject to earthquakes, epidemics, droughts, floods, migrations, as well as monsoon failures that have resulted in migrations of people out of India. So here is the smoking gun, if you will, that in 2000 BCE, that there was a 200-year monsoon failure. Today in India, if monsoon fails even for 1 year, our GDP will go down. If monsoon fails for 3 years, you have enormous problems in India. The agricultural sector is going to collapse. Farmers are committing suicide. All kinds of problems are there. Now I ask you to imagine, can you imagine 200 years of monsoon failure? 200 years of monsoon failure means southern India, which is a rain-fed, monsoon-fed river system, that would be a dust bowl. Northern India's glacier-fed rivers, those that are trickled and probably dried out. So we'd see an intense turmoil in India where people are trying to find water, move out, migrate, and all those things. And there is evidence of all of these things in the knowledge systems, in cultural artifacts, in genetics, and everything. What is positioned as into India migrations can clearly be shown as out of India by the smoking gun of this 200-year monsoon failure. We can validate this 200-year monsoon failure by looking at the isotopes of oxygen. Remember that all elements that break down by radioactivity into different things have got isotopes. By looking at the ratio of isotopes, that tells us a certain story. So in this particular paper that came out in 2017, these researchers tried to see the monsoon variability, civilization changes in Indian subcontinent. They sampled from caves in this Sahia as well as this area to take samples of these entities. And bottom line is this figure over here. These orange bars show periods of dryness or drought, and these blue arrows downward show wet periods. And this intense dry period comes in 2000 BCE, correlating very, very well with what we're seeing in other studies too. Then we have evidence from genetics, unrelated evidence in 2013, that they analyzed the empty DNA of several skeletons that were found in Syria and Mesopotamia, basically, that is suggesting a genetic link with the Indian subcontinent. So how is that possible? We are looking at 2500 to 500 BC. In that time frame, they found skeletons with connection to India. That is evidence of Indians migrating out, and they've gone up to Syria, if you will, in this particular paper. Then there's in science, there was this paper that came out and in 2016. So they found an Iceman. They found the body of what they call Ozzy the Iceman in the Swiss Alps, buried in the ice and well preserved, 5,300-year-old Iceman. And they subjected that to a lot of studies, including looking at the contents of his stomach to see what was there, his last meal, and so on. And they found the H. pylori bacteria inside that had a genetic link that was linked with India. So how is that possible? Either this man had his last meal was a curry or Indian meal, or he had some social relations with Indians, or something is there so that he's got a genetic connection with India over here. So several data points is what I'm presenting to you, which you can make connections with. Then this paper came out in 2019 in Science. And what does this paper say? This one is a very familiar humped bull. Humped bull is called Bos indicus or the zebu. This paper is saying suddenly 4,200 years ago, the zebu cattle prevalence went up greatly in the Mesopotamian lands, basically in the Hittite lands, which is northern Iraq, southern Turkey, in that time frame. So they're saying a Bronze Age shift indicates rapid, widespread introgression of the zebu from the Indus Valley, stimulated by the onset of a geological age 4,200 years ago by a multi-century drought. Indian cattle are arid adapted. They're adapted to drought conditions in India, and they ensured herd survival. So they were greatly valued in some of these places. So much so that the Akkadian seal in Louvre Museum in Paris, 2200 BCE, that shows how they're venerating the Indian bulls over there. I often wondered why that was the case. But after these papers came out, it was clear to me that this is so important at a time when there was a drought throughout the world that Indian cattle provided the wealth of those days for people. Then this paper by this Russian person in 2019, he has connected the spread of the Bos indicus as well as the human Y haplogroups. These are genetic indicators of human migrations, and originating from Hindustan and going all the way to Asia Minor. He's showing that these are all linked. The cattle did not go there by themselves. Clearly, the human owners also went with them. In this case, the Indians went out with them. This paper came out in 2018, Current Science, from Thakur Saxena Singh from Lucknow, Paleo Sciences Institute. But this one shows that paddy was being cultivated, the Lahura Deva lake sediments in Ganga plains in the early Holocene period. Holocene means from about 12,000 years ago, but the evidence given in the papers around 9,000 years ago and so on. This invalidates the other claim made that agriculture was invented in Turkey 7,000 BC and spread to India from there. That evidence can be knocked off by saying that in India itself, we have evidence of rice cultivation going back to a very, very early period of time. Then a completely unrelated paper, which was called out by Dr. Premendra Priyadarshi in Genome Biology in 2007, where these researchers wanted to find where is the ancestor of the common house mice. And they found that the ancestor of the house mice is in India. And it is from India that this ancestor went out to Madagascar, to Africa, to Europe, to Central Asia, to China, all these places. So we know that mice follows human activity because they get food from humans, either agriculture store paddy in a warehouse, but mice are going to come over there. We know that. And as humans migrate with this technology out, mice are following them. So we find from this paper 30,000 to 12,000 years ago, all kinds of migrations have been happening from India, and the mice have been going along with them. So very, very interesting to correlate this and the paddy cultivation. So I presented to you a whole lot of data from various areas to show that we got problems with the linguistics model. None of these things fit the linguistics model. So we had to question, is there any other model that will fit it well? So prior to saying that, I'd like to now say, if the Aryan invasion theory is wrong, we can throw it out and say that 1500 BCE is not the beginning of the common culture that we see in India today. The question comes, how ancient is this Indian culture, this common Indian culture that we see today? How ancient is it in India? So I'd like to present the antiquity of the Indian people. I have two talks over there that I recommend that you see: Indian Civilization Untold Story or Revisiting Indian Civilization. These are 3 to 4 years old, but still very, very relevant. Over there, I go in great detail on archaeology, paleontology, and I'm showing artifacts in India from 1 million years ago in southern India, Homo erectus samples. The Narmada man, 350,000 years ago, a skull recovered in Narmada Valley with cranial capacity close to the modern Homo sapien. And Athirampakam in Tamil Nadu, 350 to 180,000 years ago, we got stone tools indicating an advanced cranial capacity human has made this, not an archaic human in that sense. From 40,000 years ago, we got cave art and tools all over India. We have artifacts that have been found. Then 2 years ago, there's a paper from Professor Ramaswamy, Bharatidasan University, who has used underwater remotely operated vehicles in the Bay of Bengal. So 25 kilometers out into the sea, 200 meters down, he has found evidence of settlements over there, human settlements in the Bay of Bengal. About 18,000 years ago, the world experienced the late glacial maximum. That was a ice age during which a lot of water was locked up in ice. Sea levels are much lower than what they are today. So at that time, 18,000 years ago, he even found harbors over there, harbors showing maritime activity going back 18,000 years ago. Very, very interesting. Then 10,000-year-old artifacts from Kerala, Edakal caves, Birana, we have seen all of the radiometric datings. Then a paper that came from CSIR that shows underwater artifacts from Dwaraka 8,000 years ago, carbon dated in Germany, carbon dated in India, and showing those artifacts. Then what I call recent artifacts from 5,000 years ago in Harappa, Saraswati, Kiradi in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, Arikamedu, Pattanam, and other such places. So using evidence, we can show that India has got a long archaeological record showing settlements and people, evidence of people over here. Looking at the genetics, in genetics, early studies took a look at the gender chromosomes. The idea in genetics is that differences in the human genome tells us the story of human migrations. You have to internalize what I said. If we are human beings, it's because our DNA structure is in a certain way. So the DNA, as we know, is composed of the amino acids ACTG appearing in a double helix and all of these things. And it requires that those base pairs had to be something for us to be human. And we got 3 billion base pairs. And so we are human because these 3 billion base pairs are what they are. If they were not what they are, then we'd be some other species. So unfortunately, in the process of meiosis, when in reproduction, sometimes there is not a perfect copy of the chromosomes to the next generation. There are some mutations. There may be some copying errors in the chromosomes. And these mutations sometimes can become persistent in the record. That is why if we study the differences in the chromosomes between different people of the world, we can see what mutations are there in that part of the world, what mutations in this part of the world, and is this mutation present first in Africa, somewhere else, and so on and so forth. Then we can piece together a story of migrations. So that is how we do it. And we can construct something called phylogenetic tree based on these things. So the studies that people have done for the maternal mitochondrial DNA haplogroup is that the early mutations, L0 to L6, are all in Africa, Out of Africa, the earliest ones, haplogroups we see are the M and N lineages, which are in India. And it is from India that the rest of the world's lineages have been populated. So all the non-African populations of the world can be derived from the M and N lineages according to genetics. And this map will help you to understand that. This orange color is 200,000 years, black color is 90,000 years. So you see in orange, all these are within Africa, L0 to L6 lineages. Then we see 90,000 years ago, out of Africa into India. Then we see the R, N, and M. From here, we see going into Europe. We see them going to Central Asia, going to Australia, and to North and South America in these various time frames. So this is what genetics is telling us. We can study a similar story from the male chromosome, which is a Y haplogroup, where A00 to C are all in Africa. Out of Africa, in India, we're seeing the F, G, H, I, J, K, L, and R, and all the others are derived from these male lineages. Naturally, because women can't do it by themselves, so wherever we see migrations, men and women must have gone together. And we're seeing that mirroring in the DNA record over here. All these early migrations are in Africa. Then out of Africa, we see this one. And from here is where you see migrations happen to the rest of the world. So this is what the early DNA is telling us of migrations, that it is from India that the rest of the world populations were done. Then people said, what about the genetics of the present day Indians? Do we have Aryan DNA and do we have Dravidian DNA? I don't expect you to read the numbers over here, but I just put 4 papers over here to very quickly tell you the summary of what they've done. So to study the differences, typically what we do is people have something called FST. FST stands for fixation index. Mathematically, if I have the complete genomic map of you, I know the locations where the mutations of interest are. So I study for the different samples that I have across India. I try to see what is the distance between this genome mutation to that. Is there a distance? So FST allows us a mathematical measure of saying what the distances are. If we have widely separated FST in India, then it says there are different people in India. But each of these studies has come back and said the fixation numbers show that Indians are almost the same. The numbers are the same, any part of India, whether you go to Uttarakhand over here, where these researchers try to see, do we see evidence of the Chatur Varna system? If you have Chatur Varna and endogamy, then do we see in the FST index, is there some differences between these people? And they're saying, no, it does not seem to imitate that based on the numbers they've seen. Andhra Pradesh, they've done deep studies over there showing no difference at all between the so-called upper caste and the other castes. There's no difference at all. Then in southwest coast of India, whether it is in Mangalore or Kerala and other such places, no variation across various mutations, various people, the numbers are about the same. Then this is from a foreign paper over here, BMC Genetics. And this one is showing across various linguistic groups, across various regional groups, across various so-called caste groups, upper caste, lower caste tribes, across various mutations that try to see are there differences. No differences. I underlined places where the numbers slightly stand out. For example, for tribals, these 2 mutations stand out compared to the rest of the population. And this number over here stands out compared to the rest of the population, showing that there is some introgression over here, but not of the scale of the so-called Aryan invasion that has been told to us. Then some people said that, all right, the language gene is probably R1A. R1A, they said that the prevalence is there in Europe and it is there in North India. So therefore, it shows evidence of people who came from Europe into India in this time frame. Various people studied from Bashu 2003 to Thangaraj 2010. I've copied their works over here. Various haplogroups over here, H, J2, L, R1A, and R2. And if you see where their opinion is, Bashu says Central Asia, Kevisel says Southern Asia, then Sengupta says North India, Tansim says Southern Asia, Sahu says South Asia, Mirabel says Northwestern India, South Asia, South Asia. So you see many researchers are still favoring that it is in India that even the so-called R1A has originated and gone out of India. Whereas there is also counter opinions where some people are asserting that it is from Central Asia. That is what we see. 2018, Harvard Medical School, Reich claimed using genome-wide research. Genome-wide means they're no longer looking at only the gender chromosomes, the X and Y, but they're looking at the 22 autosomes in addition. However, they can recover it in the ancient samples by a lot of various mechanisms, let's put it that way. They try to recover it and try to study the story of migrations. And he came out with a statement saying that after 7000 BCE, Iranian pastoralists came into India and they became North and South Indians. Then after 3000 BC, you see the entry of these people in 1500 BC, the Aryans into India. And he proposed the poles of ancestral North Indian and ancestral South Indian based upon this model. It is not based on evidence found on the ground. Rather, it was a mathematical supposition that there are two poles and all Indians are related to these poles in various ratios. That is the way he was seeing it. At that time, I contested this in several talks of mine, saying that, look here, a red flag has gone up. If this is true, why is it that the Vedas and Puranas are talking about the Drihyu who migrate out of India? This evidence is there in Bhagavad Purana, Vishnu Purana, Vayu Purana, Brahmanda Purana, Matsya Purana, Rig Veda. Are we expected to throw out all the internal evidence that we have, multiple ones, because you cannot see this signature coming in based on the linguistic model, whose constraint you have used? So I called that out. And I said that even in this time frame, we know that the Saraswati River dried up. We know there was a Tondadia monsoon failure. We know there was out of India migrations. Where does that reflect in your studies? That does not show over there. So I said there are big problems with this model in my talks over there. You can see those talks on YouTube. In 2019, they came with a paper in Science where they added 11 ancient samples in contact with Indus Valley civilization over here. And the revised claim is they went back on their earlier claim that Iranians came into India. They went back on that claim. Rather, they said that there continues to be this Aryan invasion to India, which I continue to contest, saying there are problems with this model. At the same period of time, in Cell, there's a paper from Vasant Shinde, Neeraj Rai, and as well as this man, Reish and others, who analyzed the Harappa sample. And after great difficulty, they got some samples from Harappa, analyzed it, and the result is that there's something called the Indus Valley Civilization Cline, which is unique to India, this orange color, which they introduced some Andamanese hunter-gatherer whose common ancestor goes back to the earliest migrations into India. And they say from here, if you look, Iranian hunter-gatherers, 100% Indian, as you can see here. Iranian herders in this time frame, again Indian. By the time you come to this time frame, 4000 BC, we are seeing Anatolian color over here, as well as Iranian farmers. A mix of these two happens over here. So this is the model that is proposed by Vasant Shinde and others in Cell. So clearly, we are seeing the beginnings of an out of India from the Harappa sample going in over here. Well, let me jump to another area and conclude after that. So we're seeing Antiquity in Indian astronomy, the Indian astronomical model, nakshatras and Rashi. So we're seeing that Indians, they looked at the sky and divided it into 13 and 1/3 segments, and there are 27 of them. Today, we are in an unfortunate situation where the minute I say nakshatra, there is a Pavlovian response by most people saying, oh, I don't believe in horoscopes and all these kind of things, which is a very pedestrian way of understanding Indian astronomy. Ancient Indians had a perfect understanding of the skies in terms of the dynamics of the heavenly bodies, the tables they used, the models they used, mathematics they used. All the clear record is there in my talks. You can go and take a look at that. So like I said, they observe the moon rises in the east at a different time every day. And because of that, it appears against a different backdrop of the stars. And they identified a principal brightest star in that segment of the sky. And they were able to divide the entire ecliptic into 27 segments of 13 and 1/3 degree each. Multiply these two, you'll get 360 degrees. They also noted the notion of lunar month. For example, the full moon appeared in the Chitra Nakshatra. That month was called Chaitra Masa. In some parts of India, they use the full moon as the indicator of the month. In some parts of India, they use the Amavasya, the new moon, as the indicator of the month. That's why you see a slight offset in different parts of India over the Chaitra Masa. They also tracked the solar year by looking at Rashi. Rashi was a division of the sky in 30-degree segments, 12 of them. From the 12 Adityas, they derive into this. And so Indians had what we call a lunisolar calendar. And here are the description of the nakshatras in two of our ancient books, Vedanga Jyotisha, Surya Siddhanta, and the principal star they're associated with, which the Britishers mapped when they came to India. Kritika is Eta Tauri, Rohini is Alpha Tauri, Mrigashira is Lambda Orionis, and all these stars that you're seeing over here are different mappings of the sky and so on. In order to understand anything to do with Indian astronomy, one must have a clear understanding of the Milankovitch cycle. Earth, in addition to having a rotation in 24 hours, in addition to going around the sun once in 365.24 days, has got 3 more degrees of freedom, at least. In 1 degree of freedom, you can see that this orbit is going from circular to elliptical. So this is called a change in eccentricity, and this takes place in 100,000 years. This cycle takes 100,000 years. The Earth is also undergoing something called axial precession. It is like, the analogy is, if you have a top and you play with the top, which in Tamil we call pambaram, if you play with that, what you see is that the top spins very, very fast, but as it is spinning, you can observe that it has got a wobble sometimes. So that fast spin and a slow wobble. In the Earth is doing that. The fast spin is 24 hours. The slow wobble takes 26,000 years to complete. It is happening because of the gravitational action of the sun, the moon, and to some extent Jupiter and Saturn are causing this to happen. The third cycle is the change in obliquity, where the axis is, the tilt is changing in 41,000 year cycle. So ancient Indians had a very clear understanding of the cardinal points of astronomy. What are the cardinal points? They had Uttarayana, Dakshinayana. Uttarayana was 6-month northward course of the sun. Then Dakshinayana was 6-month southern course of the sun. So they had the extremities. They knew where the maximum the sun goes to the north, maximum sun goes to the south, the duration of the solar year. They knew all of these things. They also knew the midpoint, which is the equinox. So they knew the cardinal points, and they would observe the nakshatra at a cardinal point in their writings. In ancient India, we are seeing that New Year always began with vernal equinox. So at the vernal equinox time, they would point out to what was the nakshatra at the vernal equinox point. And that changes with time because of this precision of phenomena, where the Earth is pointing to is changing. And because of this, we can very reliably go back and date when such an observation might have been made. Anyway, long introduction. Vedanga Jyotisha, one of our ancient books. Several people tried to date it. Weber, German, he said 500 BC. William Jones, 1181 BC. Lokmanya Tilak, and various other people. Dikshit came closest to 1400 BCE, based upon what is contained inside Vedanga Jyotisha. Vedanga Jyotisha is saying winter solstice occurred when sun and moon came together in the Dhanishta Nakshatra. And this Dhanishta Nakshatra, which can simulate in a planetarium software, what you're seeing over here, the horizon line, everything below is a day sky, everything above is a night sky over here. This is the axis of rotation where the North Pole is. This is taken from the Houston latitude, so it's around 29 degrees for me. In Bangalore, this is around 19 degrees, so this point will be much lower. If you go to Sri Lanka, Jaffna, it will be close to the equator, literally. If you go to Alaska, this point will be at 90 degrees to you, right overhead. So this is the axis of rotation of the Earth. And these lines that you see are projections of Earth's latitudes and longitudes in the sky. So we are seeing that this is 90 degrees, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. 0 is a celestial equator. On Earth, it is the equator. In the sky, it is the celestial equator. On the day of the equinox, the sun would be exactly the celestial equator. Then this is south. So this is minus 10, minus 20, minus 24. So minus 24 is solstice time, where the sun has gone to southernmost point. Therefore, in the northern hemisphere, we have winter solstice. And this longitude happens along the Dhanishta Nakshatra, which is over here. So this happened in 1440 BCE. So there's an affirmation by looking at planetarium software using precisely timed precision activities. We can call out these things. Yajnavalkya was a rishi who wrote the Shatapatha Brahmana. And in his work, he says that the Kritika Nakshatra does not move from the eastern side. Therefore, you can light the Vedic fire under the Kritika Nakshatra. So this phenomena has been identified as Kritika heliacal rising on the celestial equator, on the day of the equinox, literally. And this happened in April 15th, 2982 BCE. So very, very ancient period of time. And this should now start raising questions in your mind. I'm talking about Yajnavalkya around 3000 BCE. But we are told Aryans came to India in 1500 BC, composed Rig Veda in 1200 BCE. And Yajnavalkya is far later in 500 BCE. But then we are looking at his work that is talking about Kritika Nakshatra in 3000 BC. So clearly we have problems with the linguistic model. We have an ancient epoch encoded in the tables, the Puranas, Kali Yuga, Aryabhatta, Surya Siddhanta referred to that, Pulisa Siddhanta, Aihole temple epigraphy. So Cassini was a mathematician in Italy. He inherited from Thailand, the Siam tables, which seem to have the longitude with respect to Benares and to Ujjain. And he also saw the calendar in the Siam tables had an absolute date of 3102 BCE. That was a reference point. And this was studied later on by Playfair, Bentley, Colebrook, Burgess in Surya Siddhanta. And they too saw the date, the absolute date coming to 3102 BC, February 18th. It is the conjunction of the planets, Sun, Moon, and Revati Nakshatra. Now, this is the reason why the colonialists were greatly unhappy with Indian chronology, because according to them, Noah's flood is 2300 BCE, whereas you seem to have in Surya Siddhanta a date going to 3102 BCE. How is that possible? So this is the reason why many of their angst was. I've simulated that the planetarium software, 3102 BCE. You see that the sun is over here, Revati Nakshatra is over here, Chandran is over here, Guru, Jupiter, Shukran, which is Venus, is over here, Mangala is Mars, Buddha is Mercury, Shani is Saturn. All of them are clustered in the Revati Nakshatra, 3102 BCE. We have a story of Aditi that is there in the Rig Veda. Several of places we talk about Aditi associated with the Punarvashu Nakshatra. In the Aitreya Brahmana, in the Martin Hogg translation, we are seeing the statement, the sacrifice went away from the gods. Gods were unable to perform any further ceremony. Remember, in ancient times, all Indian festivals, Hindu festivals are done by looking at the celestial calendar. When should we do a certain kind of event? And so they saw that the skies had changed. The skies had changed because of precession. And so they did not know when to perform that particular yajna. So they went to Aditi and said, let us know the yajna through thee. Aditi said, Tatastu, but I want a boon from you. They said, choose the boon. Devta said, choose a boon. She said, all yajnas will begin and end with me. Meaning that the new year will begin with Aditi and end with Aditi. Aditi is now part of the Punarvashu Nakshatra. It is showing how ancient Indians experienced the phenomena of precision over thousands of years, could not observe when the festival should be observed, and they recorded this over here that they reset the calendar to Aditi Nakshatra. And that is what you're seeing here. Aditi is this star that you see here, and her co-sister is Diti over here. And collectively, these are called Punarvashu Nakshatra. In the Greek tradition, there's Castor and Pollux. Castor and Pollux are the twins in the Greek tradition. Indian tradition, it is Aditi and Diti. And we are seeing that vernal equinox happened in Aditi in 6000 BC, staggering period of time. Some of you may wonder what on earth is going on over here. But take a look at the radiometric datings that I gave earlier. Radiometric datings are showing that India has got radiometric datings going back 9,000 years, 8,000 years, 7,000 years. So I ask you to consider this possibility. If you have broken the chains of Aryan invasion from your mind and you allow looking at the evidence, examining the evidence, we are looking, internal texts are talking about this ancient antiquity over here. Surya Siddhanta is talking about a great conjunction in the Mesha Rashi, Aries, and this comes out to be 6779 BCE in this translation by this person. Ashwinis are mentioned in Rig Veda, several hymns and so on. They were born in the winter solstice and they appear with their father, the sun, at dawn for heliacal rising. I'll not go into details, there's no time over here, but this can be dated to winter solstice in the Ashwini Nakshatra, which can be dated to a time frame of 7200 BCE. Then so on. There are many other phenomena, but I'll just skip all that and go to the rebuttal. Now, many instances of interest can be dated with astronomical observations encoded in the text. The date of Kali Yuga, for example, showing Vedic concept in place. The dates preserved in Vedas, Brahmanas, Upanishads via astronomy are showing great antiquity. The question on your mind, logical, rational question, how can Vedic concepts be in place in India prior to the so-called Aryan invasion theory of 1500 BC? Did Indians have a grand conspiracy where they backdated all of these things with great precision. Is that possible? I don't think so. These were observations, eyewitness observations made and encoded in our text. We can rebut Max Muller. Max Muller, with linguistic analysis, said there is Chandas period, Mantra period, Brahmana period, Sutra period. Chandas period, 1200 to 1000 BC. He said earliest books of Rig Veda were written here or composed over here. The Mantra period, 1000 to 800 BC, remaining books of Rig Veda. Brahmana period in this time frame, and the Sutra period where Vedangas and everything was done over here. But now we have seen Colebrook himself has said Vedanga Jyotisha is 1400 BCE. Where is 1400 BC and where is 200 BC according to Max Muller for Vedanga Jyotisha? Kritika Shatapatha Brahmana, we saw 3000 BCE. But according to Max Muller, Brahmana period is 800 to 600 BC. Then we saw in Rig Veda, Aditi and Ashwini is going back to this enormous time frame. But according to him, it is 1200 BC. So clearly we have a problem. Max Muller was confronted with this in Europe, where his own critics said, should all of Indian chronology be held hostage to biblical chronology? And he was so upset, he wrote this entire book on it, where he said, I'm not going to accept any of the Indian texts as reliable. So in one sweep, he discarded the entire thousands of years of Indian literature as unreliable. And his views, unfortunately, are used even today by Marxist scholars, socialist scholars, as well as some Indic scholars who have internalized this nonsense and doing that. Today, we know that his methodology is failed because it is confirmation bias. What is confirmation bias? Confirmation bias is where you have a set of beliefs, and there are some beliefs that you cannot, evidence the fact you cannot accept. What is your belief? Max Muller was 4004 BC creation date, and that Aryans had come to India in 1500 BCE. The evidence that he saw was that there was great antiquity in the Sanskrit texts. What was his response? He said it is unreliable. He threw them all out. What did he accept? The intersection over here, the Vedanga Jyotisha, 1400 BC. He said that is okay because after Aryan invasion theory. So this is a clear example of confirmation bias today. As a scientific method, we can call this out and say there's a failed methodology and in colonial scholarship, and by extension, also today's academia and the people who grade your UPSC papers and so on. These are the failed methodologies they use to do these things. So coming to the end over here, so we see received wisdom versus facts. Received wisdom is where you unquestioningly take the nonsense given by earlier generations without validating these things. So people who assert AIT or AMT, they say linguistics implies common ancestral language, a homeland for ancestral language in Central Asia, dispersion by invasion or migration. Srikant Talagiri has said A, B, and C do not prove Central Asian homeland, nor invasion, nor migration. You can see his papers, books, and so on. On this side, they say archaeology in Indus Valley, Harappa shows evidence of destruction. On this side, we saw Dales, we saw P.V. Kane, we saw Kenneth Kennedy, experts of Vedam. There is no destruction, no fires, no mass killings. Then they say genetics from R1A Z93, Central Asia to India implies migration. I showed many scholars who have studied this. There's no consensus. Majority of them are saying no, R1A is in India, going out of India. They say there is Aryan and Dravidian races in India. The racial theory we know is bogus to start with. And today, modern genetics studies have shown there is no significant fixation index differences among Indians. You cannot stratify Indians on a genetic measure of distances and mutations because our measures are same over here. They say there are two language families in India, Indo-Aryan and Dravidian, and therefore invasion. Today, we can show that India is a language sprackburned. Sprackburned means a linguistic area where ancient coexistence and divergence leads to mixing and divergences. That is what we see in India. That is the model. The model is not one of invasion, therefore two languages. Rather, this is an ancient civilization. India is a huge country. Northern India, Southern India, huge country. There is trade and exchanges and cultural contact between them, but there are also regional divergences. We see that language is dynamic phenomena, and we are seeing that divergences have happened. This side, they say river Saraswati is mythical. We can show satellite imagery showing ancient paleo channels, and we can have several data over here. According to Max Muller, astronomy is unreliable. We can show he's a victim of confirmation bias and his methodology is false. Many ancient dates are there from archaeoastronomy. So concluding remarks, I started out with the enforced narration. I showed that Aryan invasion theory is wrong. Rather, I removed the question mark and said that the evidence shows out of India. They say Indians are Aryans and Dravidians and tribals. We can show these identities are manufactured by these agencies. Indians do not show differences at a genetic level over here. They say Indian thought only impacted the East. I have not done this, but we can show that it impacts East and the West. They say the Indian civilization is recent, but there's enough evidence that it's an ancient civilization. So the Indian deep history taught in schools, universities, utterly wrong. 5 agencies have enforced their ideologies and frameworks controlling historiography of India: colonial, Eurocentric, missionary, socialist, academic, Marxist. Linguistic methodology is upheld to prop their narratives. It does not align with evidence from many other fields. Therefore, we say that is falsified. Linguistic methodologies falsified because there is so much of evidence from many other fields that do not align with that. The antiquity of human presence I've seen shown in India in archaeology, in genetics migration. I've shown antiquity in astronomy that is supported by material evidence from these fields. We have strong evidence to uphold the antiquity of Indian civilization. And using evidence, all I've done so far is evidence. None of them are my opinions alone. So evidence-based narration clearly discredits the Aryan invasion or migration theory that constrains Indian chronology to a young civilization. So with that, I've come to the end of my talk. If you're interested in whatever you heard, please go to YouTube and search for my name, Raj Vedam. You'll find a lot of my talks there. You can write to me at this address. You can follow me on Twitter. You can also follow me on Facebook and or on Coab. So with that, I will stop and hand it back to our host.
This was a very insightful session, sir. A lot of new information for all of us here. I'm sure about that. And with this, I have our participants. You can either raise your hands or your questions in the chat box. Meanwhile, sir, I would pose some questions which we had received in the Google form earlier.
Okay.
Yeah. So everyone wants to like many from among many questions. One is the common question that if we want to start reading about the true history, as we say, the deep history, where do we start from? Because we don't have the text yet, and where do we get, and when would this all be in the mainstream?
So as you have seen, many of the works that are shown are from research papers in 2018, 2019, 21, 22, and so on. So these are cutting edge research. What we have seen is cutting edge research at this point that is talking about these things. So you can imagine there are not enough books that talk about these things. There's a new crop of writers. Ever since I've been talking about this in 2016, 14 onwards, I've been talking about this multidisciplinary evidence. There are several people who have come forward and written books, but I can't recommend any of them as yet, because the big picture is yet to be told. The big picture is a multidisciplinary evidence narration of Indian history. So until then, I recommend you read the research papers and see my talks and other things. I have not written my book as yet, so hopefully one day that will come out. Till then, do take a look at the works of thought leaders like Professor Subhash Kak, Michel Danino, Srikant Thalagiri, and a few others. So these are the people who are working at the contesting Conrad Elst, who are working at the cutting edge of some of these areas, analyzing the linguistics model, Subhash Kak in the civilizational ideas, astronomical model, and so on. And there are also people who are working on the genetics ideas and so on. So please do see the works by these people. But there's no single book that I can recommend that will cover the deep history of India. Almost every book that you'll see, whether it's from R.C. Majumdar or Irfan Habib and others, you're going to see this internalization of the Aryan invasion theory nonsense over there. And you'll see a constraining of Indian chronology and the common culture of India from 1500 BCE downwards. Unfortunately, none of that fits the evidence that we are seeing. So for your exams, I guess you have to continue writing that to pass it. But for your intellectual satisfaction and your pursuit of the truth, do take a look at some of these evidences and form your own conclusions.
Right, forming your own conclusion based on various readings which are available on the internet as well. That is what one must do as of now. And I'm sure, sir, will be your so another question which we have is that these findings, how do they impact the Western years, Western view of India as of now?
So the problem is that there's a huge ecosystem, what we broadly call the left ecosystem, that exists not only in India, but in academia and the West in addition. And they work with each other, they amplify each other's voices, research, and so on. And as a rule, they edge out any opposition to their viewpoint, especially on ancient Indian research. If anybody like me comes and talks, the first approach is to classify, pigeonhole me as a Hindutva, saffron ideologist, fascist, and things of this nature. Because the minute you pigeonhole somebody into a demonized corner, you no longer have to deal with their message. You see, you can ignore them and you can continue with whatever you're pushing forward. That is not the way of academia. Academia needs to evaluate all the opinions coming in their field of interest. That is what an honest academic would do. I, as a scientist in engineering, I study diligently papers coming out in my area. And if there's something I don't agree with, I write a counter to that. That is the way we are expected to do. Not by demonizing. I can't go and demonize somebody because he wrote something I don't like. So unfortunately, we are seeing even the so-called thought leaders who are on the left side, they have a tendency to amplify bizarre, eccentric voices coming from WhatsApp University, rather than addressing the claims by serious researchers like Subhash Kak, Srikant Talageri, so many others who come out with serious claims. They don't dare to go there and touch those things. But they'll amplify somebody who says there was some strange kind of nuclear weapons in ancient India and things of that nature. So this is what we see. We see a tendency to demonize rather than a tendency to validate the claims. So how does the West react? That was a question to some of these things. It is the same nonsense, whether it is Michael Witzel in the West, or whether it is so many other names I don't want to mention over here from Rutgers University and other places. All of them are in cahoots with each other. So they amplify each other's voice. They revel in demonizing the other rather than trying to address the claims seriously. Whereas what we are seeing is that the Indic scholars don't have a forum where they can publish their papers because their papers are rejected by the ecosystem that controls a certain kind of narrative over there. We are seeing this because of the 5 agencies that I talked about. Now, today, these 5 agencies have morphed into the foreign policies of some Western nations in addition. Although you hear about separation of church and state and secularism, we are seeing that a certain arm of the church is deployed as part of the foreign policy. Unwritten, but we are seeing that happen. So we are seeing that the narratives that we talked about still have got great strategic relevance even today. So there's a need to keep India where it is strategically, civilizationally, not to realize its depth as a civilization state. So you as young Indians, you need to look at the evidence with rationality, logic. This is not new to the Indian civilization. If I had taken a class for you on the knowledge systems of India, I had shown to you, Rishi Kannada, who had Vaisheshika. Vaisheshika was based on perception and inference. That he said that you need to perceive, you need to infer from that, build on old knowledge, build into new knowledge. So this is a tradition going in India for thousands of years. And this is who we are inheritors to. You can't blindly take received wisdom from some textbook that told you this without examining what is the basis on which you made the claim. I need to know your data. I need to know your model. I need to know your methods. I need to know on what basis, what results did you get to make the claim that you did. Once you do that diligence, you'll find that all these left heroes have got feet of clay, literally feet of clay over here. None of them can stand academically in the basis of the evidence coming over here. So change is coming, but these 5 forces are tightly holding the narrative to their chest. That is why we are finding it difficult to pry it open and change things. But I think change will come with your generations who understand where the reality is and advance this.
Right, sir. Beautifully answered, sir. Asking all the WH questions which we have is what will lead us to the change, I'd say. So another question is that how do we differentiate between mythology and the evidences? And there
Ah,
was a question on this.
okay, so first of all, the word mythology is wrong because we have to be very careful in applying the word mythology. My studies into the accounts show that there's a metaphoric way of speaking. Today we are speaking in English where I'm using precise words with certain kind of semantics to communicate an idea very concisely. This is not the way in the ancient past. We know that in the Sanskritic literature, great value was placed on terseness, how terse and poetic form in the chandas that you have used and so on. How can you communicate an idea? So there was a great deal of interest given. So not only are you a scientist, but you're also, in a sense, somebody can compose prose, poetry and prose, and communicate ideas in a certain way. So we are seeing the mechanism of communication of information was using metaphors. Metaphors are powerful at communicating something, provided you have the lens of somebody in that culture. If I, for example, I use the word Ashwins, that is a stand-in for the idea that of two Ashwins are twins. But if you did not know that in Indian thought, then you'll say that it's a mythological nonsense over here, but that's what it is. If I say Chandra married the 27 daughters of King Daksha, now, the deracinated person or the person who's got a pedestrian level understanding will say, wait a minute, you're anthropomorphizing the moon. He's not a man. He's not marrying 27 women in the stars over there. What nonsense is this? But then we see that the Indians had encoded an observational wisdom in an entertaining capsule that you're going to remember. Even today, you know from your experience that your mind craves for entertainment all the time. It's like a drug. 1 minute you're on WhatsApp, another minute you're on Twitter, another minute on Facebook, Instagram, or you want to eat something or be entertained all the time. That's the point. Our ancient Indians knew this. They knew if pedagogy can be made into an entertaining capsule, that message will go across the centuries. And the evidence is there that their story survived till today. That story has been narrated generation after generation after generation in in temples and other places so that we remember it today. So the story of Chandra marrying the 27 daughters of King Daksha encodes observational wisdom of the nakshatras. The story of the nakshatras tells us which nakshatra is going to follow which nakshatra and so on. The story of Chandra loves Rohini more than the others encodes an idea of occultation, of the orbital dynamics over there, how often the moon goes past Aldebaran. Aldebaran is Rohini, and all of these kind of things. Similarly, I've analyzed several Indian stories and showed that they have a metaphoric content in them. You may want to search for my articles on Medium, medium.com, Raj Vedam, medium.com. You see, I've attempted to analyze some of the Indian stories in the context of metaphors and show that there's metaphoric wisdom in many places. So when we use the word mythology, I'm advising caution. The word mythology allows you to pigeonhole something as nonsense. Don't do that. Rather, take a look at it and go for metaphoric information. What is the wisdom? Your ancestors were not idiots, okay? They had the same cranial capacity as you and me. You got 1400 cc brain, they had a 1400 cc brain. They're not idiots saying the moon is doing this, moon is doing that. They were a culture that has evolved great mathematics, astronomy, and other things. So they used a certain mechanism to communicate information. That is what you need to keep in mind. The missionaries and the colonial people who translated Sanskrit works, they had a vested interest in presenting India as backward, primitive, superstitious. So they presented these works in a way that is devoid of the metaphoric content, but presented as mythology. Max Muller sealed it by saying all Indian works are unreliable. Therefore, we threw out thousands of years of wisdom saying none of these works are relevant in my understanding the Indian civilization. Don't be that. Tomorrow, if you be an IAS officer, don't be that. Please find the civilizational depth and try to understand your own writings in the context of observation wisdom, in the context of metaphoric wisdom. Let me give one story and then I'll stop with that. The story is that of Karkati. I don't know how many of you have heard the story of Karkati. Karkati was a monster. So this monster prays to Brahma for a boon. And eventually Brahma comes and asks, what boon do you want? That monster says, I want to become as tiny as a pinhead. In fact, the translation says it will shine by the reflected light of the sun. As tiny as a pinhead. and I want to enter humans through their nose, eyes, and mouth, and I want to consume them from inside. It's a monster with great appetite to consume people. And this monster resides in a place where the hygiene is poor, where people do not follow Dharma Shastras. Dharma Shastras, remember, are a manual for hygiene, manual for many other such things. People who don't follow Dharma Shastras, people who are not righteous, people who don't have unhealthy habits, who are gluttonous, it resides over there. It's a clear understanding of disease transmission vectors. Disease transmissions happen in unclean, unhygienic places. Gluttonous people are going to get all kinds of diabetes, whatnot, all those kind of things. It's an understanding. However, that story has been put as Karkati praying to Brahma for a boon. So the deracinated person sees the story and says, mythology. But the person who makes an effort to understand the civilization realizes my ancestors understood that there was disease transmission vectors, encoded this in the story, and has transmitted this over time. So that is the example I wanted to give you.
This was absolutely relevant, and it reminded me of myself of many other stories which do resemble the present day situations, but we tend to put them in the mythology sector. So
it's a measure of how much we are deracinated. It's a measure of how much we are deracinated. We have been made ignorant. We have been made deliberately ignorant by the five forces. You must understand that. We have a pedestrian understanding of our own civilization. None of us can connect with the ancient civilization of India in our practices, our understanding, nothing. We have little fragmented understandings and grabbing onto the past. That's all we have. But we have a great duty to connect back. I hope that is the message to take away from what I'm saying.
Definitely, sir, it is, yes. So another technical or say academic questions, maybe. She's asking that, is there any evidence of evolution of sapiens from Neanderthals in any of our Puranas?
That's a good question. I don't think, if there is, I don't think it is going to be easily available. You'll have to scan the works and apply different metaphors and try to see, is there anything that might come to that kind of an understanding? We do have from our Ramayana and other works talking about different species, the Vanaras, for example. The Vanaras are clearly, it's not our common understanding of bears and monkeys. It only means not human. That's all it means. Or somebody is dwelling in the forest and things of this nature. So they had a different appearance. They were shorter in stature and things of this nature. We know from studies in the Flores caves in Indonesia, which was reported about 15 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, that there was a species of humans living on those islands in Indonesia, Floresiensis, Homo floresiensis, if I'm not mistaken, that's the name of the species, that were 3 to 4 feet tall. They were only 3 to 4 feet tall, that particular species of humans. So we had known in Ramayana that there are descriptions of people who were short, pretty short, and the stature, their appearance are different from what we are. Who are they? We have no idea. And we have descriptions of people who are Rakshasas or very big growth and so on. We don't know. So we cannot make the claim that there was a coexistence of Homo erectus, Homo sapien, Denisovans. We cannot make that claim because we don't know. Our understanding of the past is through the fossil record. The fossil record is showing that after 600,000 years ago, we don't find Homo erectus samples. Then the fossil record is saying that Homo sapien samples in India are at a particular time frame. Then the genetics is saying from 90,000 years ago. However, I presented to you Narmada man, Atiram Pakam, 350,000 years ago, evidence of superior cranial capacity. Who were they? They were not Neanderthals. They were not Homo erectus. So who were they? If Homo sapiens came from Africa, who were these people in India making specialized tools? So many specialized tools. So now there's a thinking that they could have been Denisovans who lived in this particular time frame. So the past is very murky. If you see a claim of species, now the thinking person in you must say, is there a strict specialization that all of these things are Homo erectus, all of these things are Homo sapien? Is there a sharp distinction? And you'll find that these are continuous records. Homo sapien did not come out of nowhere in 200,000 years ago. Homo sapien came out of earlier humans who lived. Those earlier humans are eventually going to the species that we call Homo erectus. Do we see evidence of that in the genetic record? Well, we don't know where to look. We don't know where to look. Today, we are looking at certain mutations. Those mutations are saying, yeah, from 90,000 years ago, I tracked this mutation. But these mutations are few compared to the 3 billion base pairs that we have in our DNA. So all the differences that we have is 0.1%. Just understand what I'm saying. Every difference in this room and the world that you're seeing between people, their appearance, their diseases, whatnot, all those things are because of the 0.1% differences in the base pairs. If it was any greater, I guess we'd be a different species. But the point is that we don't know what to look for in a Homo erectus haplogroup that we can track in us. We don't know. We have a common substrate. In that common substrate, we have a few locations where we are seeing what are these mutations. So do our Puranas, do they contain a record of evolution? I don't know. One will have to study it carefully. We cannot advance any of these claims, but we also understand the limitations of science when it makes a declaration that this species went out extinct in 600,000 years ago. One has got to look at that claim. One has got to look at that claim and say, how did that claim come? What, on basis of what? What is the model? What is the data? And if we find new data that goes against that, you have to be open to changing that. That's the way of science. So keep an open mind. Keep an open mind. It's not easy to neatly compartmentalize this species in this time frame, this species in this time frame. No, the world is not that simple. It's far more complex than that.
Right, sir. Sir, another question we have. Mohit, after this question will come to you. Are there any genetic similarities between Indians and Irish roots? Because there are like in South American empires, it is seen that they are inspired by India because the temples are known as Shivalayas and like that. So is there any similarity, or we can say any connection between them?
Well, I don't know about those claims about temples called Shivalayas in South America and other places. I don't know whether I validate those claims. But regarding the other connections between Indians, Irish, and others, yes, there are certainly connections. In fact, we read the works of Nicholas Casanas, who's tried to analyze the so-called Indo-European deities. In India, we got the Vedic deities, Indra, Varuna, and others, Agni and others. In other parts, Scandinavian countries, they had their own deities, which is a common link. There's a commonality in all these Vedic deities and the stories and so on, which hints at a common place, origin for them. So yes, there is a link. If you look at the Celts are the Irish people over here. I have tried to analyze their observances. For example, their observance of, what is it called? Samhain, Samhain. That is a festival on which the Halloween is patterned. That is a date they observe it is after Dakshinayana has started. In a certain Amavasya, they observe Samhain, where they make offerings to their ancestors. And that is the same time when Indians also offer the offerings to all their ancestors. After Dakshinayana started, the Amavasya over there, we have I forget the name of that particular ritual, but then we have an offering to all the ancestors in that particular time frame. So we see common links between Vedic practices, ancient Celtic practices prior to their becoming Catholic. And we see that these hints should tell us there is a common origin for all of them.
Right. Okay. I hope it clears a doubt. Yeah. Sir, yes, Mohit, you can ask your question. Please go ahead. Please unmute yourself. Just a moment. Yeah, you can unmute yourself, Mohit.
I can't hear you.
Mohit, try removing your earphones and then asking maybe. Okay. Till then, so we have another question.
Okay.
and this is it might be of great interest. So the person is asking what significant changes it will bring in our study of ancient history if we study it in the right way.
Tremendously important, because if you ask the common Indian on the road, whether in New Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai, Calcutta, what are you or who are you as an Indian? What is your identity? Guess what? Nobody can articulate that question. They'll feel so much different anxiety to say anything over there. They'll say, wait a minute, why do you ask me this question? Well, I salute the national flag, I sing the national anthem, I play cricket, and I watch Bollywood, and I eat a lot of good food and drink. That's about it. So this is their understanding of identity as Indians. However, the articulation that I am the inheritor of this civilization, this ancient civilization going back to a great period of time, people are loath to do that. And the reason is they have difference anxiety, because they've been taught all this class nonsense, caste nonsense, and so much of others to make them feel ashamed of their past, their identity, who they are. So most Indians today feel great anxiety to wear their identity on themselves. If we were to teach the history of India correctly, and correctly is, there's no reason why we should not do that, because this is the truth. Indians have been a civilization that tried to seek truth. I've talked about this in my talks on knowledge systems. If you look at the darshanas, if you look at the pramanas and everywhere, the goal of life for Indians, if you ask a one-line statement, what is the goal of life? Today in India, you can't articulate that. Maybe on the road, you ask somebody, what's the goal of life? You'll say to make money and enjoy and that kind of thing. But the goal of life in ancient India was to dispel avidya. Avidya is loosely translated as ignorance. Dispel avidya about your existence and gain vidya to understand that you're Brahman, to understand you're part of the cosmos. And that pursuit took them through various pramanas, through various darshanas, depending on the sampradaya that you were into trying to understand the nature of truth. So we are a nation of truth seekers, seeking the truth. And in order to seek the truth, you use the darshanas, the questioning mechanism. You never accept anything. You have to question it. Where did it come from? Perception, inference, logic, rationality, enumeration. All these things have been used by our pramanas to understand who we are. Whereas the common culture today that you see, the Abrahamic systems, have been one of, thou shall be a seeker, a follower. In India, you are a seeker. They are a follower. They are a follower because they have a divine dictated law. Somebody gave that law to them through a prophet or somebody else. And your goal in life is to follow that law for admission in the afterlife to heaven or to eternal damnation in hell. So this is a worldview of Abrahamics for the longest time, whichever part of thinking. Indians, the worldview has been you're a seeker and you need to seek knowledge. So if following that line of thought, we are seeking knowledge. We are seeking the truth. We're seeking the truth about our civilization. Who are we as a people? Do we blindly follow because received wisdom of colonial missionaries, socialists, and Marxists based on ideologies, or do we go to the evidence based on perception and inference? So if we take this as our national character to search for the truth, yes, our textbooks must be changed, and we will certainly have a much deeper grounding in our civilizational ethos. We'll not be ashamed to say who we are. We will not be wearing this bastardized identity that we are wearing today. That will not be there. To be a much more authentic identity with great pride. And having that civilization depth will give our youth great strength to move forward in every area that they are in, rather than always seeking Western approval. Yeah, because they say everything came from the West. Oh, I did this little theorem. Do you think it is right? And the minute a Westerner says it's right, you feel very, very happy. Those kind of things will go away. The difference anxiety, low self-esteem, everything gets away because you know you have civilizational depth. You know it's your ancestors who thought the world. You know all of these things. So I think it'll make a great difference, Samruddhi, as far as understanding these things are concerned.
Absolutely, sir. It will make us better Bharatiyas.
Absolutely, yes.
So follow-up question on that. What will it take to change the textbooks of our schools?
So this is not only your question. So millions of others have this question. I'm asked this question in every talk that I go to. And like I've told you, there are five forces. There are five forces holding this dearly to their chest. You cannot pry the hand away because they're holding it so tightly. So they have the echo chambers, they have their ecosystems that try to maintain this. So we got the following possibilities. One possibility is academia is honest. It understands the evidence coming forward and will put forward a new theory and make things happen. Second possibility is the government. Government comes over there and says that our identity is completely messed up because of these forces. This is where the authentic history is. We need to go there and change the textbooks with a mandate, governmental mandate. Well, we are seeing that academia is not the least interested because it serves the interests of many foreign policies as well as ideologies over here. They're not going to change things. And you're seeing that the government, including the current BJP government, has got no interest. Either they are ignorant or they are scared to change. One of the two things. One is cowardly, or the other one is they are ignorant bunch of people who have no idea how to change things. So either case, we're seeing problems over there, which means the third force. Third force is the common people. You are all the common people, and the more you learn about the truth, the more your voices get louder and louder, saying that we as a civilization demand that this is the history. Now that you've attended this talk, you see the irony of writing in your exams that enforced narrative, whereas in your mind, you probably remember my talk saying that, look, evidence is showing something else. Let this paradox grow bigger and bigger. Let school children know it. Let school children challenge their teachers. Let this continue happening to such a crescendo that at some point you'll see change coming through. That change may come because political forces will find it expedient to now go with a majority whose minds are awakened. That awakening needs to take place. That is what I've been doing for the last several years, including in this talk over here. And I hope you'll also be ambassadors, taking this forward and awakening more and more people with this.
Absolutely, sir. Change is in process. It will take time, but it will be one day definitely. So Mohit, yes, you can ask your question if you have fixed your mic.
I still can't hear you, Mohit.
Mohit, please type your question in that case. Arika, you would want to ask your question? Yeah, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, lovely.
Yes.
You mentioned that the epoch of Kali Yuga starts at 3021 BCE. I mean, if time's allowed, are you happy to tell us a little bit more about all these four yugas that we have?
Okay, it's how to approach this issue. Let's approach the issue first with data. Do we have the data of 3102 BCE? And I gave you several pieces of data. One is I said every traditional Hindu starts his prayer saying how much of time is elapsed from Kali Yuga to the present time. A traditional Hindu starts his prayer even today with that marker. Second piece of data is Aihole temple epigraphy that talks about Kali Yuga. Third is a Siam table from Thailand in 1600s was recovered for Cassini that has got encoded inside it this absolute date of 3102 BCE. Fourth data point is Surya Siddhanta, which all the colonial people studied. That too has got encoded over here, this date of 3102 BC. So we're seeing this 3102 BC as an irrefutable piece of evidence. Rather, it's uncontestable. It is definitely there in our texts, epigraphy, and so on. So 3102 BC exists as a calendar. It has been associated with Kali Yuga, at least from Surya Siddhanta, Aryabhatiya, and so on, associated with the Chatur Yuga system. Then the question comes, what is the Chatur Yuga system and when did it come about and so on? These are different questions. These are not related to this. So the data 3102 BC exists independently of the Chatur Yuga system. Chatur Yuga system has got a 1:2 to 3:4 kind of a time frame. Kali Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, Satya Yuga. Okay, it's got a 1:2 to 3:4, where the bottommost one, Kali Yuga, is of a certain time frame, and you multiply that by 2, multiply by 3, multiply by 4. Eventually, it comes to 3.8 or 3.2. I forget my exact numbers. Million years for one entire Chatur Yuga. So the Indian system, which is there, where is the evidence for this? It is there in the Bhagavata Purana. It is there in Srimad Bhagavatam. They talk about this. Aryabhatiya talks about this. Surya Siddhanta talks about this. They talk about the duration of these yuga cycles Srimad Bhagavatam also has got a model of the cosmos. The cosmos is likened to the Indian philosophy of Narayana. From Narayana's navel comes Brahma, and he brings forth the creation. And the creations exist for a certain period of time, and there's something called pralaya. Pralaya is dissolution, and a new day starts, and a new thing starts. So there's a model of creation, a model of the cosmos, the Srimad Bhagavatam. We can take the mathematical constants presented in the Chatur Yuga system, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and we can see that the day of Brahma comes to 4.5 billion years. Based upon this, for example, you take 71 Chatur Yugas, it forms a Mahayuga. You take a certain number of Mahayugas, it forms something called a Manvantara. You take a certain number of Manvantaras, it forms something called a Kalpa, and that Kalpa is equal to 1 day of Brahma. There's a day of Brahma, night of Brahma. So if you take the day of Brahma, it comes to 4.5 billion years. Why is that relevant? That is relevant because people like Carl Sagan and others notice that it is almost precisely the age of the Earth. The age of the Earth is 4.55 billion years. Okay, the Earth is supposed to have formed by the accretion model. Accretion model means the solar system model is one where there was a supernova about 5 billion years ago in the vicinity of our solar system, perhaps. And that supernova caused the gases to collapse in the nebula that formed the sun. And it also formed by accretion the planets around it, including the Earth. So some of the earliest rocks that we have on Earth, we have determined the time frames based upon several radiometric methods that we have, radioactive methods, and we are ascertain the age of Earth is 4.55 billion years, including using meteorites that fall on Earth. We are able to find the isotopes of certain minerals. I'm going into science here. I don't think it's necessary for you, but there's a deep science in what I'm saying over here. Based on the isotopic contents of certain minerals, we're able to estimate what is the age of the Earth, and we have the date. What is fascinating to me is that the model of Brahma's day at 4.5 billion years, what does Brahma's day mean? Brahma begins his day by calling forth a new creation. So the creation, the current creation that we are in, according to the Srimad Bhagavatam, is 4.5 billion years, which coincides almost precisely with science, 4.55 billion years. And if you take the day and night of Brahma along with the Sandhya, Sandhya is a time when he does not do anything, it comes to approximately about 15 billion years, 14 billion years. And the time frame of the cosmos today from the so-called expansion of Big Bang is supposed to be 13.8 billion years. So these constants cannot be ignored. It is not a coincidence also. I say in several of my writings, one time coincidence, second time head-scratching coincidence, third time I say there's something over here. So repeatedly I have found metaphors in the Indian systems that have got absolutely meaningful data coming over there. And I question, are these metaphors or coincidences, or are these enlightened knowledge coming out there? Now, the rational person in us cannot accept the rishis of the past would have had knowledge of these things. How could they have done it? This is what a rational, logical thinking person might think, that, look here, scientific revolution started with Renaissance. Renaissance, scientific revolution, Western Europe, secularism, that is when our modern world started. This is the kind of linear thinking that has come to the West. Well, if you think, for example, most of the great discoveries were made by something called serendipity. It's not something you're looking for, but you find something. Serendipity has led to some of the greatest discoveries that we have today. We also have several scientists, and I myself am witness to that. We have flashes of intuition. Intuition. Where did that come from? Some message came to your brain, suddenly say, this is the model. Why didn't I try this? I go to the computer, try that and do something, right? We sleep overnight thinking about a scientific problem, day and night. Suddenly in the morning, you have an idea saying, try this and it might work. Is it your subconscious mind working? We have no idea how the mind works, but the mind does work. It is not a logical A plus B giving C, giving D, giving E linear progression, but it's through abrupt fits and starts, using serendipity, using intuition, using dreams, states, and such things. That's how we get knowledge. Now, the rishis are known to have gone into dreamlike states, into meditative states of mind, pondering over the mysteries. Rishi Kanada and others. Rishi Kanada propounded the atomic theory. Atomic theory, where all matter is composed of, much before Dalton or the Greeks had it, Rishi Kannada has got some of these things. How did that come about? Through a process of introspection, understanding, questioning, but they did not have the jargon, perhaps, to put it in a form that you will understand in today's technology. So they used metaphors. They used metaphors that are easily understood, having a divinity as a stand-in for a force, for example, and they compose some of the writings. So I told you all of these things because it's important to get the depth of understanding that ancient Indians had in various areas. And one of them is precisely this. If you ask me, how did the Chatur Yuga system have encoded in it the age of Earth? I'll be hard pressed to tell you that. But what I will tell you, Arika, is that the data is there. You cannot contest the data. The data is there. Srimad Bhagavatam, you go there. It's a Surya Siddhanta, Aryabhatiya. Take the data, do it, do the math, you'll find it is there. I cannot explain to you how they got it. So in the Chatur Yuga system, we find enormous timelines going to trillions of years, and we don't know what sense to make out of it. It'll be foolish of me to come and say that, yes, humans have existed for that period of time. We don't know what it means. Was it used for astronomical accuracy, as some people say, that Aryabhatta, Surya Siddhanta wanted great big numbers to have accuracy in the absence of floating point numbers? Is that the case? Or is this a revealed knowledge about the great antiquity of the cosmos itself? As opposed to other primitive notions that Earth was created in 4004 BCE and other such things. Your ancestors seem to have had this very, very enlightened way of looking at the cosmos and big questions of existence.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Sir, so we have the question from Mohit. First of all, he is very honored to listen and interacting session with you. After following you on Sangam Talks and other platforms. He's asking that what are the similarities between Mayan civilization and Sanskrit?
I cannot say much on this because I've not studied this problem much. I know anecdotally there are several data points that call out similarities between the Mayans, Aztecs, Olmecs, and others. It calls out several similarities. I have seen them, but I myself have not done any deep study on that. So I will not be able to say anything. I'd like to say things only with evidence. I don't have that yet. I know there are data points, but I need to analyze it.
Right.
But let me preface that just a little bit. So in my earlier talks, I have pointed out that early religion probably originated in India. It is only when somebody has got a full belly and you're free of any dangers, you can sit under a tree and watch the stars and ask, who am I and what is my purpose on earth? That philosophical question cannot be asked in the savannas where there's a drought or where there are other problems, you're running away from a lion or whatever, where survival is of importance, or in Central Asia, where winters are very harsh at minus 30 degrees centigrade and so on. That existence would have been the issue over there rather than philosophical question. India would have been the place where an equilibrium would have been got with the resources, the food, the climate, everything where you could ask these questions. Where is the evidence for that? Evidence for that is there in the so-called shaman culture. Shaman is a new word. It comes from shamana, which is the Jain monk, but it's a new word. But what evidence we have is a commonality of the shaman culture in India, Central Asia, Mongolia, Siberia, North America, South America, Korea, Japan, Czechoslovakia, and Bulgaria, other places like this. A common culture. What is that common culture? That common culture says that this person can enter into a trance-like state by dancing, by smoking certain drugs, and by entering into a trance-like state by beating the drum, rhythmic dancing, and things like that. He is able to commune with animal spirits, and he can correct any imbalances in you because of your debt to the universe. So this is the kind of common culture we find everywhere. I have pointed out that in Czechoslovakia, they found in a grave in, forget the name of the archaeological site, 30,000-year-old archaeological site, where they found the remains of a woman shaman. They know it's a woman because of the red color and certain artifacts present in a barrier that is over there. And I am saying that 30,000 years, the time I showed to you in the genetic migration out of India, when the ice ages ended in Europe 50,000 years ago, that is when Indians started migrating out. Neanderthals died out, and Homo sapiens from India were migrating out. That is a time frame they probably took earliest religion to various parts of the world. And that is why we have a commonality of shaman culture over here. It includes North and South America. So if you see the Mayans and other such things where there is seems to be a commonality with Indian culture, one has got to be open to the possibility that that could be an echo from maybe 30,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, a common culture. It's a bold claim, but I have some evidence for this.
Right. I hope this satisfies your question, Mohit. Yes, Harish was raising his hand. Harish, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir, I'm not a history student, but the fact is, if I didn't got this chance to talk to you today, I would have left incomplete. For last 2 years, I've been going through your number of videos. I got so much inspired from you. I've been trying to talk to you on Twitter, your Facebook page, and today is that my lucky day.
Thank you.
So before I come to my one small question, the fact is I'm one of those ambassadors which you are referring a common man who wanted to take your learning to another level. So what I was trying, I was a part of one club, speaking club, Toastmasters. So even I picked up your lectures and I've shared your knowledge with a lot of those people, and everybody was shocked. I was really amazing. I need a sort of a permission from you, sir, so that I can translate or I can make your shorter video in Hindi, and so that it can reach to a wider public in at least in India. Because the knowledge, I've gone through all those Daksh, ancient India, Aryan invasion theory, etc. But I really wanted that even the people who are non-English, they should also gain knowledge of this.
Certainly, I'll be glad to give my permission. So it's already in public domain. You're welcome to use it, but please do form the attribution. Too often we find people don't attribute, but do give the attribution, and feel free to propagate it. I'll be very grateful to you for doing that.
Definitely, sir. You're my guru. And sir, one more thing, which I wanted to ask you. One guy asked me specifically, he said me that it's about astrology. He asked very generic question that how these 12 signs can impact 8 billion people. And really, I did not had answer for this because I was really looking for some deep video on this, which may not be getting into too much of a detail, but broadly can actually spread a knowledge that how our astrology system is good, and it should not be something which is left out to specifically to very, very deep knowledgeable people only.
So here's where the terminology problem comes. When somebody says astrology, I say I have no idea what that is. Because in India, we only had something called Jyotish Shastra. Jyotish Shastra encompassed the entire spectrum of studies from Siddhanta all the way. You go to Varahamira's works and Brihad Jataka and others, it goes over there. In India, we see enormous intellectual activity in trying to understand the behavior of heavenly bodies, trying to understand how quickly something moving in the sky. Can I predict where it is going to be next? Every word that I'm saying has got deep proof, mathematical proof from the Indian tradition. Vedanga Jyotisha has got something called Rule of Three. What is Vedanga Jyotisha? 1440 BCE document based on the observation it contains on the Dhanishta Nakshatra, winter solstice. That has got something called Rule of Three, which today you'll recognize as A by B is equal to C by X, where X is unknown quantity. With cross multiplication, you find out what X is. This rule is there in Vedanga Jyotisha. It says this rule must be applied again and again, iteratively, to get the final answer. What is it that Vedanga Jyotisha was doing? So I am saying that they wanted to track the movement of, let's say, Mars, or let's say Saturn, or some such body. So they would measure where Saturn or Mars is, how quickly it is going in the sky, And if they wanted to estimate where it is going to be in a certain period of time, they form this expression A by B is equal to C by X. And by cross multiplication, they find out what X is. They find out what the delta X is. So for example, if some body moves a distance delta S in a time delta T, the question is, how much is it going to move in capital time T? You understand what I'm saying? They could measure the delta as a distance delta by whatever means they had. They got bamboo sticks that keep on the ground, and they could graduate that in terms of yojanas and do all those things. And they had water clocks. We have evidence of water clocks in Harappa. Water clocks is used to estimate time, so they could measure delta T. They could measure delta S, measure delta T. Ask the next question, given that it moves so much in a time delta T, where will it be at time capital T, far away? And Vedanga Jyotisha says, apply this formula iteratively in small steps. This is integration. This is the essence of calculus is over here. When? 1440 BCE. You see what I'm saying? So Indians had great models to estimate the models of the solar system. Epicycle models were there. Various dynamic models, not frozen time. We see evidence from Aryabhatta to Nilakanta Somayaji. We see evolution in the model behavior itself. We are seeing so many things. I can't describe to you in this short talk. I need about 2-3 hours of knowledge system to tell you this. But the point is that even people like British colonialists who study the Indian epicycle model, like Brennand, Brennand, take a look at his work on Hindu astronomy. He says the Indian epicycle model has got least error around 3000 BCE. Let that digest for a minute. Epicycle model of Indians and Surya Siddhanta, he says, has got least error. What is this error we are talking about? If I am taking, okay, let me go back. The sun goes Uttarayana, Dakshinayana, minus 24 plus 24 degrees. If I want to say from vernal equinox to vernal equinox, does the sun come back to zero longitude? Zero longitude is vernal equinox position. That is what I want to do. I want my model to predict this. If my model does not predict it, there's an error. He says the error in that model is least 3000 BCE. It has been growing ever since. Anil Narayanan, who's a researcher in our times, he said the error is least in 5000 BCE, not 3000, but 5000 BCE. We are told Aryabhatta copied the epicycle model from Ptolemy to Almagest, the Greek model. Utter nonsense, because they're showing the error in the Greek model is much, much greater than the error in the Indian model, according to Anil Narayanan. So why am I saying these things? Indians have got clear evidence of astronomy plus mathematics, Siddhanta, going to a very, very ancient period of time to map the heavenly bodies, to understand the movement of bodies, and so on. They explored everything under the sun. Your ancestors were so intellectually active, they wanted to see where else do these cycles happen. They saw cycles in the nakshatra model. Every 27-day sidereal month, moon comes back to same nakshatra. They saw the phases of the moon, the synodic month, that every 29.5 days, you come back from Amavasya to Paurnami back to Amavasya. They saw that. They saw Uttarayana, Dakshinayana. They saw so many cycles that Saturn takes 30 years to make one cycle to come back to same zodiacal plane. Jupiter is taking 12 years to come back to same zodiacal plane. So they tried to see where else can these cycles be applied. And they tried to see the human lifetime. Remember the Purusharthas that we have, that you have a cycle in the human lifetime, that you start out this way, continue on as a student, continue on as a householder. So they saw cycles everywhere. They see the woman, they see menstrual cycles. They see harvest, they see a certain cycle of fertility over there. So they tried to see, can these cycles be mapped to the astronomical clocks that we have? So therein was born these ideas of Brihad Jataka, Varaha Mihira, and others who tried to explore predictively using the Siddhantic, astronomical, mathematical models that they had to use for prediction. Where do we see that in today's world? Talk to me. I'm an engineer. I use predictive models today. I construct models of machinery or whatever, and then I use these models dynamically to predict how will this behave in the future. If I know how it will behave in the future, I'll do some corrective action now in control systems, for example, things of that nature. So this is what your ancestors were doing. They're trying to predict when will there be cycles, when there'll be good times, bad times. And somewhere along the way, somebody has found this 7-year cycle of Shani and other such things that seems to correlate well with psychological conditions. Who are we to say that we understand the human psyche so well? For example, a child born in winter versus a child born in summer, is there a difference in their psychological profile? This most certainly is, I would imagine. In winter months in northern India, it's cooler, whereas in summer months in southern India, perhaps, it is so much warmer and you're uncomfortable and so on. There definitely is some hormonal changes that take place in how you behave and your disposition towards things. I'm certain about some of these kind of effects. So Indians have tried to correlate cycles, when the good times, when the bad times, and other such things. There's a psychological model, for example, that if everybody in a family is psychologically in a good time, then maybe your prosperity is amplified. Similarly, if everybody in a family psychologically is going through a bad time, there's a lot of stress in your house, your wife is going through a certain shani period, you're going through a shani period, somebody else, there's a lot of yelling, screaming at home, and so much of stress, your lifetime is reduced. Cardiac arrest and all those kind of things. So there are some observations that our ancestors have made, and they've tried to correlate the psychological model along with the analytical model of heavenly bodies, pegging it to the heavenly bodies with the psychological model, and try to evolve those notions that we see in Brihad Jataka. These are attempts, intellectual attempts at trying to reduce the psyche, human condition, down to mathematics, down to cycles, down to astronomical cycles. That is what we are seeing. There is no astrology as far as I'm concerned. It is a broad spectrum from Siddhanta to Jataka. It's a broad spectrum of works. That is what I see. The Europeans, when they came, they digested whatever they could do in Indian astronomy, mathematics, and other such things. But then the Abrahamic systems say it is the will of God. You cannot predict the future. So they left all the prediction to Indians, saying astrology is all Indians. Astronomy is all the new modern science that is all Western. So they left you with a superstitious, backward, primitive thing. Remember, I started my talk that way. So this is the way they presented Indian works. The correct way to see Indian works is a broad spectrum from Siddhanta. Siddhanta means mathematical astronomy, all the way to Jataka, which Varahamira and others worked on. Are they effective? I'm not the person to talk about it. How do you work with it? I'm not the person to talk about it, but I can give you an opinion on the intellectual tradition that led to many of these things.
Yeah, I hope that was, yeah. Sir, we'll take last two questions, one oral and one from chat. It's been a long while you're here. Thank you for the time. I have a question saying that how do we improve our knowledge and understanding of the ancient texts?
Good question. So many of the English translations by colonialists should be avoided. Wherever possible, try to take Indic scholars. I recommend starting with Aurobindo. Aurobindo's got a lot of works, English translations on Upanishads and Indian culture. Start with Aurobindo. Start with Aurobindo, go to authors like P.V. Kane, go to authors like, what is his name? The philosopher, I forget his name, the 5-volume work on Indian philosophy by a Bengali gentleman, forget his name. But there are several works, Indian authors. Take the Indian authors because Indian authors were grounded to the tradition, especially the older they are. If you come to more recent Indian authors, they are deracinated. But if you go before 1940, 1930, 1920, they were deeply connected to the tradition. So take those English translations and you'll get a more authentic understanding of Indian texts. Once you read the English translations, then if your knowledge of Sanskrit is good, you can try to get actual Sanskrit and try to read it for yourself there. But remember, many of the Sanskrit works, like I said, they prided themselves on how terse they can make it. So you need bhashyas. Bhashyas are commentaries on Sanskrit works by later scholars. Bhashyas were commentaries of the masters. For example, Aryabhatta wrote Aryabhattiya very tersely. Bhaskara one had to write a commentary on that, Mahabhaskariya. And through that, Aryabhattiya, so he had to write a commentary on Aryabhatta's works. That's how we understand many of the formulas that Aryabhatta used. If you read just a Sanskrit in Aryabhattiya, you will not understand how to do it. But if you read the commentary, then you'll understand. Similarly, commentaries on Rig Veda by Sayanacharya, who was the prime minister of the Vijayanagar Empire, 1300 current era. So that helps us to understand Rig Veda much before the Griffith and others came and muddied the waters with their translations. So look into some of the ancient works and you might get some authentic understandings. Okay, is our host still there? Okay, I think our host has dropped out, but I do see a hand from Chiranjin Hota. So please go ahead.
Pranam, sir.
Pranam.
Sir, so glad to listen to you, sir. Sir, I have a question, sir. From my childhood, I have studied in DAV, sir. So it's established by Dayanand and Saraswati, sir. DAV Public School, sir. So it was against idol worship. So can you tell me the significance of idol worship in Hinduism? And second is about karma, sir. What is the significance of karma, sir? I don't understand, sir. Can you give it?
Let's take it one at a time. So Arya Samaj movement was a deracinated movement. It was deracinated because those people came at a time when the missionaries were trying to put down Hinduism and trying to say these are superstitious people, idol worship, and so on. That difference anxiety led certain group of Hindus to reform Hinduism, to move away from so-called primitive, because they wanted to look acceptable in the eyes of the Westerners. That's what led to those kind of movements. As far as Indians are concerned, we have had the notion of Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. Nirguna Brahman is Brahman without a form and Brahman with a form. And you could worship either. So the earliest Vedic practices with the Vedic deities and so on, there was a Brahman, the notion of Brahman was there's no form to the Brahman. It could be just about, anything. So this was a too abstract a concept for the common people. So at some point, we see the notion of Ishtadevata came about. Ishtadevata was, how would you see the deity that you like? For example, if I'm a wrestler, I would probably like to be as strong as Hanuman. So I'd have an image of Hanuman over there every morning. I pray to Hanuman, and then I want to do all the exercises like Hanuman and do that. So it's an aspiration model. Similarly, if I was a dancer, I'm going to have Nataraja in a corner in my dance floor, and I pray to Nataraja and I do the dance because Nataraja is the leader of dance, literally. Similarly, if I want to do learning, I'll have Saraswati somewhere and I'll pray to Saraswati and pray for learning and so on. So the Indian deities of Ishtadevatas were aspiration models. What are the attributes of the divinity that you want to see reflected in yourself? So you're praying to the divinity for inspiration to be reflected in yourself. So most of the formed deities that you see, whether it is Ganesha, whether it is Shiva, whether it is Saraswati or any other deities, are aspirational models, are the formed Brahman with form, Saguna Brahman. So at some point in Indian Hinduism, it came about that people started using this formed way of worship. Prior to that, it was more abstract notion of Nirguna Brahman without a form, that is used in meditation, that is used elsewhere to understand that there is no difference between creator and creation. This is the Advaitic model. No difference between creator and creation. We are all part of cosmos. So we are Brahman. That is
question, sir. One question. What is the relation of Buddhism, sir? Then is Jainism and Nirguna Brahman, sir? Buddhism, Jainism?
So Buddhism and Jainism, they rejected certain notions. One has got to understand that they came out of Hindu or Vedantic bedrock, but they had certain ideas. Gautama Buddha came with certain ideas. His ideas were, there is no permanent reality. Or if there is a permanent reality, you cannot conceive of it. He said, everything is in change. You can only observe change. And his notion was this change is coming because of desire and all these kind of notions. He came about with certain formulas, this eightfold path for nirvana and others. So he used perception and inference are the only pramanas to understand the truth. Perception and inference are the only ways to understand the truth. So he rejected Shabda Pramana, he rejected the Vedas, he rejected everything else as a valid means to understand the truth. And he only wanted perception and inference. And in his perception and inference, he cannot see a permanent reality. So that is the difference over there. Jainism came with certain other ideas on cosmos and creation, the Tirthankaras and others, and it came with certain other ideas, again based on pramanas. Do see an image that I show in my talks on knowledge systems. I have shown the pramanas and different sampradayas and which of the pramanas they accept. You'll see it over there. So the Charvakas, for example, they said only perception. If I can experience it and see it, then it's real. Otherwise, it's not real. So they rejected everything else. So here, Buddhism was at least perception inference. So whether you look at Samkhya, whether you look at Nyaya, whether you look at Vaisheshika, all these only differed in which of the pramanas was acceptable as a means to truth. To give you an understanding, if I'm doing my PhD today in electrical engineering, what am I going to do? I'll go to the library. I'll look at the best journal over there, IEEE journal on electrical engineering. I look at that and I say, okay, here is a paper by MIT professor or Nobel Prize winner. He published this theorem. So I'll do my PhD on the basis of this theorem. I'll prove something else. So what am I doing? I'm saying on the authority of that MIT professor who was a Nobel Prize winner who published this theorem, I have used his work and I've done something little more. And that is my claim to truth. Do you see that? The Shabda Pramana of somebody else who has done that on the basis of that. Ancient Indians had this deeply evolved understanding of pramanas, various pramanas on the path to accept truth, where Shabda Pramana was one of them. So by the time you come to Advaita, you're seeing that it's accepting different pramanas from various other places. So the differences, if you ask me, are epistemological. Epistemology means the means for knowledge. That is the difference between various sampradayas that we see. It's necessary to see it this way. If you take the socialist or Marxist ideology and viewpoint, they'll position this as a reaction to Brahmanism, caste system, and all this nonsense. However, the evidence does not show any of these things. Evidence is showing that it is an intellectual development in understanding the nature of reality, the nature of truth. When Gautama Buddha talked about change, he said these things. You cannot perceive permanent change. You can only perceive changes. Whereas Advaita said the cause and the effect are both Brahman. You must understand that. In the universe today, we're seeing everything as cause and effect. You asked me a question, that was a cause. That's why the effect is my answer. So it is saying both is Brahman, both the cause as well as the effect is both driven by Brahman. It's both Brahman. So Advaita gave a very encompassing answer to the nature of reality. So it's important to pose these questions in the pursuit of truth, nature of reality, what did different thought leaders say? That's where it is. So your earlier question started out with idol worship. So I talked about Nirguna Brahman, I talked about Saguna Brahman, I talked about Arya Samaj, which is a deracinated way of looking at Hinduism. They tried to pattern Hinduism closer to Christianity. So they rejected many of these things. But the authentic historical tradition in India shows we had Nirguna Brahman, we had Saguna Brahman. Saguna Brahman based upon aspiration model. What do I like to see in myself reflected from the divinities? That is why each divinity has got a certain property. Saraswati with the Vakadevi, as well as the musical talents, learning, and so on. Ganesha, remover of obstacles. Mahadeva, the protector. Durga, the protector, once again, against health issues and things like that. Every divinity had an aspirational model. You would pray to the divinity and follow those practices to do certain things. So it all fits in very, very well along the Dharma Shastras, the things they wrote, and the prescriptions they had for life. So it is a holistic model. One has got to see these things in that way.
Sir, second question was the significance of karma, sir. Karma.
So the Indian model was one of the consequences of actions that we do. Every action that we do is a generator of karma. So the karma can, some people are trying to liken it with a sin model. That is not true. The Abrahamic sin is not karma at all. Karma can be good, karma can be bad. I cannot beat you first and get some bad karma, then give you a chocolate and get good karma. So karma is not an algebra sum. You will experience the fruit of your bad karma separately and your good karma separately. So this is the Indian model. So the Indian model has been that life is one to be practiced in pursuit of your dharma. You need to understand what your dharma is. And as you're executing your dharma, you're going to incur karma. You're a karma generating machine. So you're incurring karma with every action, word, thought that you do. And your karma will decide upon the course of action of your life and your future lives. So the karma, for example, says that you have, for example, certain habitual things. You might be driven to, let's say, gluttony, or you might be driven to sleeping a lot, or maybe driven to drinking or whatever, so on. These are what we call vasana. Vasana are the ruts on your Atman from your previous birth. Your previous birth leaves these ruts so that you are like a wagon that goes on the road. The road has got some ruts over there. You try to avoid this, you keep falling back into the rut, right? Keep falling back to the rut. So the life is like that. So there's an understanding of why we are disposed to certain things in this lifetime based upon our vasanas and karma phala. There's an understanding that our goal in life is one of dharmic, living dharmically. And understanding one's dharma is not like 10 commandments. It is not absolutism. 10 commandments is absolute. Dharma is relative. Understanding what your dharma is never easy. So one has got to understand what is the correct thing to do in every situation, given that each situation is unique and provides different challenges. So we have different dharmas on the different caps that I'm wearing. For example, I might be a father, so I got a father dharma. I might be a brother, I have a brother dharma. I might be a brother-in-law. I might be, let's say, employee. So I have an employee dharma. I might be a citizen of India dharma. So I got various dharmas wearing the cap, depending on the caps that I wear, including I have a swadharma to myself. So I need to understand at any given time what is the right thing I must do so that it's right for all the dharmas, so that you're in the natural rhythm of the universe. If everybody did that right, the universe is in rhythm. This is the ancient Indian understanding. And the consequences of doing these things is karma. You're generating karma along the way. This karma is like an account which controls how your lifetime is going to be. For example, the karma notion is there in Bhagavad Gita, where Bhagavan Krishna is telling Arjuna that even if you don't accomplish a spiritual goal in this lifetime, in the next lifetime, you'll be born closer to a spiritual goal. You'll be in a family that encourages you closer to a spiritual goal. This is there in the Bhagavad Gita, an articulation that karma will decide your future choices, how you're going to be born, in what family, and how you're going to do it. Anecdotally, we have got evidence of reincarnation in many cultures in the West, in India, East, that seems to bear some truth to some of the things that we are saying. If
So
you
do you
read,
think reincarnation is a myth? Reincarnation is a myth, do you think?
Once again, let me finish. If you see NDE, near-death experience, you'll find many of them on YouTube. Many of them are recounting what we would have in the Vedantic understanding, your flashback of your life, what is happening, and choices you made, and so on. So there are some things that our ancestors have said in the karmic cycle on what we do. At any given time, I'm supposed to be mindful of the karma that I'm generating. As I'm living dharmically, be mindful of karma. In my talks, I often say, in today's world, reducing your carbon footprint is equal to reducing your karmic footprint, because every activity we are doing today is releasing carbon and is having climate change. Species are dying out. India is so hot these days, right? Climate change and water problems, suffering, all that is happening. Understanding that I have conscious choices to reduce my carbon footprint is today's version of dharmic living. It reduces my karmic footprint if I were to do that. So it's synonymous with that today. So we have to contemporize the message of karma and understanding how we can live those lives today. Yes, go on. We are saying something.
Reincarnation, sir. Like all the religion has been reincarnation, sir. So what do you think the significance of it? Is it truth or is it just human mind, sir? Reincarnation, sir.
So that is a good question, and none of us can answer that definitively. But what we have is anecdotes and case studies that have been collected from all over the world. In University of Virginia, there's a professor called Stephen. He's dead now, but his student is continuing that work. The psychology department in University of Virginia that has collected enormous numbers of case studies, which they've clinically studied these things by having control factors and other such things. And they've documented cases of reincarnation in the United States, in India, in other places. We cannot explain how these things work. How does a child suddenly say that it was in some other family, some 100 kilometers away, it was a wife of somebody, and she died in a certain way? How do these things happen? We don't know, unless it is some kind of memory, culture, some kind of atmic memory coming from there to here. We don't know that. But our ancestors have told us that there is reincarnation.
Yes. So
just a minute.
I hope your questions are answered now.
I'll take that last question, Samruddhi.
Okay.
I'll take that last question.
Sir, you told about Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman, sir. Is that Nirguna Brahman relates to Nishkam Karma, sir? like Sarguna Brahmana, you told about aspiration, sir. So if we are Nirguna Brahmana, can you explain me that Nishkam Karma that refers to Nirguna?
See, I think both Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman give rise to the same model. If you ask me, they're the equivalent. One is not superior to the other. Both are equivalent. It goes to bigger questions. What is the biggest reality over there? If you are somebody who follows the Dvaita Sampradaya, or if you follow the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says he's a supreme Godhead. Everybody else is demigods. Worship the demigods, you'll go to demigods. Worship Krishna, you'll go to Krishna, and so on. So the question comes, are we in the pursuit of Brahman? Are we in the pursuit of Saraswati? Are we in the pursuit of Krishna? What are we in the pursuit of? It comes to that question. But the bottom line is, we are enjoined to understand our contribution to the rhythm of the universe, which is dharmic living. The guideposts and the reference books are there in Dharma Shastras, which are guideposts, as well as many of the Upanishads, many of the commentaries that we have. And we are expected to understand our role. There is no hard and fast rule over here, but understand our role in what is the right way of living. In today's world, we have got unique set of challenges that our ancestors did not have to face in climate change, in wars, in bigotry, and many other things. So we need to understand, what does it mean to be a dharmic person, understanding this karmic model over here, and not get too caught up in Nirguna Brahman, Saguna Brahman of the past, what is superior, what is not. I think our role as intellectuals here is contemporizing these messages into our present day living and showing that there's a superior model to bigotry, that Abrahamic systems are bigoted and they cannot conceive of live and let live. They cannot live and let you live. You have to die if they have to live, or you have to become one of them. So that kind of a model has caused great hatred, violence, and problems in the world. And one has got to show that the Sanatan Dharma, with our dharmic understanding, is a vastly superior model to the problems of today. To do that, we have to contemporize and put our energies into contemporizing and not be caught up in some battles that may not be very productive.
Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you, sir. You have explained to a lot length and answered all our questions in a very simple, words, which were very difficult to think